Chapter 2895. Rumble. Crack. Tribulation after tribulation continued to descend. The sunset divine bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts protected Qin Feiyang with their lives. Clang. When the 70th tribulation descended, the sunset divine bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts were all shattered. The dazzling divine light also dimmed. The axe, dragon-slaying sword, black demon spear, sky phoenix saber, and death god scythe were all covered in cracks. The only ones that were still intact were snow and blood blade. Because they were sealed, the sunset divine bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts were not allowed to attack. They were only responsible for protecting Qin Feiyang. They are almost at their limits, Snow said in a low voice, but there are still 28 tribulation left. How can we survive it? Bloodshed was also deeply worried. Rumble. The 71st tribulation arrived as expected. A destructive force enveloped them. Quick! The power of this tribulation has already surpassed the initial stage of the sovereign realm. It has reached the level of the initial stage of the sovereign realm. Let's join forces. The sunset divine bow roared. Damn it! What kind of tribulation is this? How can it be so strong? The shield of earth could not help but roar. Even heaven-defying artifacts like them had never encountered a sovereign realm tribulation before. Clang! Clang! The dragon-slaying sword, black demon spear, sky phoenix saber, and death god scythe were all activated and attacked the tribulation together. Crack! There was no suspense. The 4 heaven-defying artifacts were shattered on the spot. The dragon-slaying sword and the other 3 heaven-defying artifacts had only entered the land of origin before Qin Feiyang went into seclusion. Therefore, they were still inferior to the sunset divine bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts. This tribulation could not be stopped at all. It crazily charged toward Qin Feiyang. Go! Snow shouted. The Bloodblade's artifact spirit sighed. Qin Feiyang, I never thought that there would be a day when I would risk my life for you. I didn't expect it either. Qin Feiyang smiled slightly. In the past, he had been mortal enemies with Bloodblade and Snow in the Great Qin Empire. He initially thought he would be able to keep fighting against the 2 law-defying god weapons. Who would have thought that these 2 heaven-defying weapons would risk their lives just to help him? It was indeed true that the world was unpredictable. Boom! Since the 2 heaven-defying divine artifacts were sealed, they could only try their best to attack the heavenly tribulation. With a loud crack, the 2 heaven-defying divine artifacts were instantly shattered. However, the heavenly tribulation did not disperse. Let's go again. Sunset bow roared. The sunset godly bow and the other godly artifacts were already in pieces. When they were attacked by the heavenly tribulation again, they were almost shattered into pieces. They had suffered unprecedented damage. However, the heavenly tribulation had finally dissipated. Qin Feiyang, this is our limit. The sunset bow's voice was soft and powerless. It had never felt so weak before, and its consciousness was fading away. A heaven-defying relic is about as strong as a half-step ruler. However, over the years, we've been cultivating in the land of origin, and we've already reached the level of an initial ruler. However, we're still far from the initial ruler realm. Qin Feiyang, we've already tried our best. You can only rely on yourself for the next heavenly tribulation. Fu Tu also said, Thank you. Qin Feiyang bowed deeply to the 18 godly artifacts. These godly artifacts had already done their best to help him up to this point. Soon after, Qin Feiyang waved his hand, and the 18 broken pieces of the heaven-defying divine artifacts disappeared without a trace. Thank you for your hard work. Inside the black tortoise world, when the 18 godly artifacts appeared, the little boy said gratefully and immediately sent them to the land of origin to recuperate. There are still 27 heavenly tribulations left. What should we do? Fire Lotus looked at Qin Feiyang in the image anxiously. We can only pray now. Huai walked to Fire Lotus's side and sighed. What's the use of praying? Fire Lotus said angrily. What else can we do? We can go out and help, but will it be of any use? You heard the Sunset Divine Bao say that the heavenly tribulation's power is at the initial ruler realm. With our cultivation, let alone the initial ruler realm, the power of a half-step ruler realm is enough to crush us. Huai said, Huai is right. Now we can only pray. Whether or not Feiyang can survive, this heavenly tribulation will depend on his luck. Lu Zhengyang clenched his hands. He was right in front of him, but he couldn't help. This feeling of helplessness almost made him collapse. Yi Zhong, the five-clawed golden dragon, the mermaid princess, Zhao Tailai, the blood Qilin, the demon ancestor Yishui, and the others all looked miserable at this moment. What are you all doing? We have to have confidence in him. He was able to overcome so many difficulties in the past. This time, he will definitely be able to do it. The white-eyed wolf looked at everyone and roared. Everyone looked at the white-eyed wolf. In fact, everyone knew in their hearts that the white-eyed wolf was more anxious than they were. It said this just to find comfort in its heart. Outside, the 73rd heavenly tribulation, which had been brewing for a long time, finally descended. The destructive aura shattered the starry sky within hundreds of millions of miles, and countless stars trembled. The aura rushed out of the Milky Way with earth-shattering momentum. The revered dragon, the princes, the ancestral dragons, and even Qin Batian had to retreat from the Milky Way. At this moment, only Qin Feiyang was left in the entire Milky Way. He stood alone in the Milky Way, looking lonely and desolate. Am I really going to die? The heavenly tribulation was so powerful that even he couldn't help but want to give up. This was the biggest crisis he had encountered in his life. Although the small beast and the ice dragon were also very strong, he didn't feel such an obvious sense of danger when facing them. This was because he knew that the small beast and the ice dragon wouldn't kill him easily. But this time was different. The heavenly tribulation had no emotions, and it wouldn't show any mercy. However, he was really unwilling to die like this. The revered dragon hadn't been destroyed. He hadn't brought the ancestral dragon back to reunite with everyone. He hadn't fulfilled his promise to give the woman he loved a grand wedding. He hadn't taken back Chang Shui, and he hadn't avenged the inner demons and big cousin. He didn't want to die. Yes, I still have things to do. I can't die here. Give up, never. Even if there's only a glimmer of hope, I have to work hard to live on. Qin Feiyang roared, his eyes burning with a strong desire to live. Boom! The heavenly tribulation descended, and an aura of death suddenly enveloped him. He was only left with his divine soul. If even his divine soul was destroyed, then he was really hopeless. I can't die. I still have a 10,000-year promise with the small beast. I must defeat it, take back Chang Shui, and avenge the inner demons and big cousin. I have to live on! Qin Feiyang roared in his heart. But no matter how strong his desire to live was, the heavenly tribulation was merciless and frantically obliterated his divine soul. In just an instant, only a few strands of his divine soul were left. Is it over like this? Qin Feiyang's consciousness gradually fell into darkness. The last few strands of his divine soul also collapsed with a loud bang. No, it's not over yet. At the same time, Qin Feiyang used his strong willpower to reform the few strands of his divine soul that had collapsed. But even if they were reformed, what was the use? What did he have to do to bring the dead back to life? The heavenly tribulation, lightning. In an instant, countless thoughts flashed through Qin Feiyang's mind. Suddenly, he caught a trace of something ethereal. This kind of thing couldn't be explained clearly. Only he could understand it. The heavenly tribulation was evolved from lightning. Lightning was even a yang thing, the nemesis of evil. What it represented was actually not killing, but justice, the great Tao, the law. lightning came out, evil was destroyed. Lightning was also one of the laws. Qin Feiyang suddenly felt enlightened. His consciousness became clearer and clearer, and the profound meaning of lightning constantly appeared in his mind. When only the last strand of his divine soul was left, an obscure aura suddenly appeared around his body. The last strand of his divine soul also rapidly collapsed. However, the disintegrated divine soul was not destroyed by the lightning. Instead, it began to wander within the lightning. His consciousness also did not dissipate. Instead, it became even clearer. He saw something different in the lightning. It was a kind of profound meaning. However, the mermaid princess and the others in the Black Tortoise realm did not know about Qin Feiyang's current situation. Seeing Qin Feiyang's last strand of divine soul collapse, everyone immediately fell into a state of grief. The mermaid princess's face was covered in tears. The white-eyed wolf also collapsed on the ground, large beads of tears rolling down his face. Outside the Milky Way, sensing Qin Feiyang's aura dissipating, Qin Beishan's body also trembled. However, the ancestral dragons were overjoyed. As for the revered dragon, although her expression could not be seen, she could feel a trace of joy in her emotional fluctuations. Only the prince of the dragons sighed. He was still looking forward to the battle with Qin Feiyang, but now it seemed that this expectation had come to nothing. Although this is not the ending I want to see, in my heart, you will always be a worthy opponent. The prince of the dragons murmured, "Something's not right." Suddenly, Qin Beishan's eyes trembled. The revered dragon, the ancestral dragons, and the prince of the dragons all looked at Qin Batian in the distance. Qin Batian took a step forward and landed at the entrance of the Star River, looking at the tribulation clouds in the Star River. It's indeed not right. The prince of the dragons also landed at the entrance of the Star River. He glanced at the tribulation clouds and the blood-colored lightning flashing in the tribulation clouds. "What's wrong?" the black dragon, ancestral dragon, asked. "Since he has fallen, why hasn't the tribulation dissipated?" The prince of the dragons said. "That's right." This sentence woke everyone up. The revered dragon and the other ancestral dragons immediately woke up. There's only one explanation for this phenomenon. Qin Feiyang is not dead. The prince of the dragons' eyes flickered. The ancestral dragons raised their brows and scanned the Star River. However, they did not see Qin Feiyang's figure, nor did they sense Qin Feiyang's aura. Lightning is the creator of heaven and earth. Suddenly, an ethereal voice sounded in the Star River. The ancestral dragons were shocked. In the Black Tortoise world, everyone who was in grief was also shocked and quickly looked at the screen. Because the owner of this voice was Qin Feiyang. He was not dead, but in the Star River, they did not see Qin Feiyang. Lightning is the righteous Qi. The ethereal voice sounded again, echoing in the Star River for a long time. The mermaid princess and the others were happy and confused. The voice clearly sounded in the Star River, but no matter how hard they tried, they could not find Qin Feiyang himself. Lightning appears, evil spirits fear. Lightning moves, the world is shocked. As the last word fell, a figure gradually appeared in the lightning. If it wasn't Qin Feiyang, who could it be? Chapter 2896. Qin Dage. Feiyang, young master. Seeing Qin Feiyang appear, everyone in the Black Tortoise world couldn't help but be excited. Fire Lotus, mermaid princess, and the others were even crying tears of joy. Why is this happening? He clearly died under the heavenly tribulation, but he actually revived. However, the various ancestral dragons were filled with anger. This little bastard, how could he live so long? It's really strange. The dragons also looked at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. Previously, Qin Feiyang's aura had indeed disappeared, and in the galaxy, they didn't see Qin Feiyang. But why did he suddenly appear again? From now on, I will be the ruler of the Thunder Tao. Qin Feiyang stood in the middle of the heavenly tribulation and slowly raised his arm. He opened his palm, and wisps of purple lightning flashed out. This is Longzuan was shocked. The law of thunder. Qin Batian enunciated each word, his expression filled with shock. He never expected that Qin Feiyang would actually comprehend the law of thunder at this time. At the same time, in the Black Tortoise world, Yi Zhong and the others were also very excited. The law of thunder, this was another kind of law power. In addition to the law of light and the law of cause and effect, Qin Feiyang had now mastered 3 kinds of law power, although they were just beginners. Just based on this point, his future achievements would be limitless. Some were happy, some were sad. Longzuan and the various ancestral dragons' faces were extremely gloomy at this moment. Not only did he not die under the heavenly tribulation, but he also benefited from the disaster and comprehended the law of thunder. What kind of monster was this? Why was it that every time he performed, his performance was always so unexpected? The law of thunder, this was another powerful law power. Crack! The 74th heavenly tribulation fell. This time, not only did Qin Feiyang not resist, but he even opened his arms as if he was welcoming the heavenly tribulation. One had to know that he was just a wisp of divine soul now. And this was the last wisp of divine soul left. In such a situation, if it were anyone else, facing such a terrifying heavenly tribulation, they would not even be able to escape in time. However, he had nothing to fear. There was even a hint of a smile on his face. The heavenly tribulation struck him. What happened next left everyone dumbfounded. Qin Feiyang was not injured in the slightest. How could this be? The various ancestral dragons mumbled. Isn't this too outrageous? One had to know that this was a might comparable to the sovereign realm. The might of a sovereign realm expert was actually unable to harm a strand of Qin Feiyang's divine soul? Crack! The heavenly tribulations descended one after another. Qin Feiyang stood proudly in the galaxy, surrounded by blood-red lightning. The destructive aura shattered in all directions, but only Qin Feiyang remained unscathed. I don't believe it. This must be a dream. He has already comprehended the laws of light, so how could he possibly comprehend the laws of lightning? Ancestral Dragon shook his head. But that's the truth. Qin Batian said with a smile. Shut up. Ancestral Dragon glared at him fiercely. Qin Batian smiled and ignored Ancestral Dragon. He raised his head and looked at Qin Feiyang with a gratified expression. Then he looked at Qin Feiyang. At this moment, not only did the heavenly tribulation not bring him the slightest threat, it gave him an incomparable sense of intimacy. It was as if he was in the embrace of a mother. He felt warm all over. Boom! Finally, the 99th heavenly tribulation arrived. The blood-red lightning gathered together and formed a heavenly tribulation with a diameter of more than 10,000 feet that blasted towards Qin Feiyang. Qin Feiyang was still smiling as he welcomed it. The heavenly tribulation landed on him and instantly drowned him. The power of lightning roared crazily, but did not harm him at all. The tribulation cloud began to dissipate and was replaced by a pure white auspicious cloud that emitted a sacred aura. Suddenly, a divine light emerged from the auspicious cloud, illuminating half of the galaxy and fusing into Qin Feiyang's body. Immediately, Qin Feiyang's divine soul began to recover, and his body began to reconstruct. Ancestral Dragon roared, "Take the opportunity to kill him!" Boom! The 10 ancestral dragons immediately erupted with a terrifying aura and blasted towards Qin Feiyang. Humph! But at the same time, Qin Batian snorted and opened a space crack, instantly blocking in front of Qin Feiyang. You're courting death. The 10 ancestral dragons were filled with murderous intent and blasted towards Qin Batian with their divine power. With just you guys? Qin Batian sneered and the space-time laws emerged. A wide space crack appeared in the galaxy in front of him, revealing a dark, bottomless pit. Immediately, the divine power of the 10 ancestral dragons was swallowed by the space crack and did not cause any waves. Seeing this, the pupils of the 10 ancestral dragons shrank slightly. This is the profound divine ability, space-time black hole. Long Zun said, profound divine ability. The 10 ancestral dragons were shocked. That's right. The power of law, except for the beginner level, has a profound divine ability at every level. The profound divine ability at the initial level of the space-time law is space-time teleportation. As you can see, entering the space crack and teleporting to the other side. And when the space-time law is comprehended to the initial level, the second profound divine ability can be activated. This profound divine ability is space-time black hole. Space-time black hole can swallow divine power and divine arts, including divine weapons. Of course, divine weapons are limited to the supreme level. Facing a heaven-defying divine weapon, space-time black hole can't swallow it. Long Zun said in a deep voice, I see. The ancestral dragons were enlightened. I really didn't expect you to comprehend the space-time law to the initial level so quickly. Long Zun stared at Qin Batian and said gloomily. Qin Batian smiled faintly. No matter how strong I am, I can't compare to you. Humph. It's good that you know. Long Zun said coldly and raised his arm in the air and shouted, Space-time black hole! His words were law. The astral river around Qin Batian crumbled apart, revealing a gigantic black hole. This black hole was dozens of times bigger than the one that Qin Batian had opened before. A terrifying aura emerged from the black hole, and Qin Batian immediately fell into the black hole uncontrollably. That's right. Space-time black hole could swallow living beings. Qin Batian could not help but feel a great sense of danger. But at this moment, 3 figures appeared beside Qin Batian. These 3 people were Yi Zhong, Cloud Supreme, and Beast Supreme. The 3 of them were sent out by the little boy. Now, only Yi Zhong and the other 2 could help Qin Batian and Qin Batian, because Yi Zhong and Cloud Supreme had both stepped into the complete imperishable realm. Although Beast Supreme hadn't broken through, his cultivation was still in the complete imperishable realm. Boom! As soon as the 3 of them attacked, they immediately waved their hands. 2 waves of fire and a wave of water rolled out and blasted into the space-time black hole. This wasn't divine power, but the power of laws. The 2 waves of fire were formed by Yi Zhong and Beast Supreme's fire laws. The wave of water was formed by the water laws. Obviously, what Supreme Cloud had mastered was the law of water. The power of the 3 laws blasted into the black hole, and it immediately trembled. Boom! At the same time, Qin Batian also waved his hand, and the space-time laws turned into a torrent and blasted into the black hole. Under the joint suppression of the 4, the space-time black hole finally collapsed. Yi Zhong! Long Zun shouted angrily. Yi Zhong looked up at Long Zun with a complicated look in his eyes. The eyes of the ancestral dragons were also filled with anger. Why? Why did you betray me? Long Zun shouted. Yi Zhong said, You know it in your heart. I don't know. Long Zun said angrily. Cloud Supreme said, If you don't know, then let me tell you that you brought this upon yourself. Shut up. Long Zun glared at Cloud Supreme. What? You won't let me say it? After Yi Zhong faked his death, how did you treat Yi Shui? And Old Man Yi? To tell you the truth, Yi Zhong faked his death back, then was a test for you. If you had treated Yi Shui, and the rest well, Yi Zhong wouldn't have stayed in the Black Tortoise world. His loyalty to the dragons, no. His loyalty to you is witnessed by heaven and earth, but unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. Cloud Supreme sneered. Hearing this, Long Zun clenched his fists. Yi Zhong looked at Long Zun and said with a faint smile, Let's let bygones be bygones. It won't be that easy, Long Zun said gloomily. Then what do you want? Kill Yi Zhong. Do you have the ability? Sovereign Beast sneered. Looking at Sovereign Beast and Cloud, Long Zun suppressed the anger in his heart and looked at Yi Zhong again, asking, Are you really going to help Qin Feiyang? Yi Zhong was silent for a while, then looked at Long Zun and said, He is this old man's disciple. This sentence was enough to express his position. Good, very good. Since you are heartless, then don't blame me for being unrighteous. Let's wait and see. Long Zun snorted coldly and left with the Imperial Prince and the 10 ancestor dragons. Sovereign Beast said, Why don't we kill them now? This sovereign agrees. They can't use the power of the sovereign divine weapon in the galaxy now. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Cloud Supreme thought. No. Yi Zhong shook his head. Why? Can't bear to. Cloud Supreme raised an eyebrow. Yi Zhong smiled bitterly when he heard this. Qin Batian sighed and looked at Sovereign Cloud and Sovereign Beast with a smile. Don't misunderstand, brother. Yi also has his concerns. The two couldn't help frowning. Although they can't use the power of the sovereign divine weapon in the galaxy, we can't use the power of the sovereign divine weapons either. Because these sovereign divine weapons are now seriously injured and can't be repaired in a short time. And Long Zun is at the great perfection imperishable realm, stronger than us. According to my observation, his power of law has reached the 4th stage. There's also the Dragon Prince. He has a heaven-defying, divine artifact. The Imperial Prince of the Dragons is very strong, and with the sovereign divine weapon, his battle strength can't be underestimated. So if we really fight, we don't have much chance of winning. Qin Batian said, But we also have sovereign divine weapons. Aren't you and Lu Jingyang's 4 sovereign divine weapons still intact? Cloud Supreme frowned. Although you're right, what's the use of killing them now? They must have left their divine souls on Divine Dragon Island. If we kill them, they can still be resurrected. So, fighting with them now is completely meaningless. Qin Batian shook his head. Chapter 2897. So troublesome. Cloud Supreme looked out of the galaxy in annoyance. It is indeed troublesome. If we want to completely destroy the dragons, we have to break the barrier set by Ice Dragon on Divine Dragon Island. After the barrier is broken, we can kill our way into Divine Dragon Island and get rid of their true bodies and divine souls left in the sacred land. But after the barrier is broken, we have to face the sovereign divine weapon. It's difficult. Qin Batian shook his head. At the same time, the ancestral dragons who had returned to Divine Dragon Island also looked at Long Zun in confusion. Why are you looking at me? Long Zun raised his eyebrows. My lord, their divine weapons were all damaged by the heavenly tribulation. Why didn't you take the opportunity to kill them? Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon, asked suspiciously. Idiot, do you think Qin Batian and Lu Jingyang's 4 divine weapons are to be trifled with? Long Zun said angrily. Dragon God's face stiffened. He had really forgotten about the 4 divine weapons. Long Zun looked up at the sky and sneered. No hurry. When I step into the sovereign realm, it will be their doomsday. But my lord, did Qin Feiyang say that when he steps into the imperishable realm, he will declare war on us dragons? Blood Dragon, Ancestral Dragon said. The other ancestral dragons also looked at Long Zun with heavy expressions. Because Qin Feiyang had successfully passed the heavenly tribulation and stepped into the half-step imperishable realm, it was a fact. He might come to Divine Dragon Island later. Calling you stupid is overestimating you. If he declares war, do we have to accept it? If he has the ability, he can break the barrier and kill his way into Divine Dragon Island. With that, Longzuin led the prince of the dragon clan into the dragon palace without looking back. Yes, yes, yes. With the barrier set by Dragon God, Qin Feiyang can't kill his way into Divine Dragon Island. Blood Dragon, Ancestral Dragon, patted his head and nodded with a smile. Longzuin has already calculated in his heart. We don't have to be too worried. Besides, even if they can break Lord Dragon God's barrier, don't they still have the sovereign divine weapon? Do you think they'll be able to fight against a Dominator weapon? Thus, our Divine Dragon Island is absolutely safe. The woman in white said with a smile. She was the white dragon, Ancestor Dragon. The other ancestral dragons nodded in agreement. But there's one thing that I don't know if you've noticed. Blood Dragon, Ancestral Dragon suddenly said, "What?" The other ancestral dragons looked at him doubtfully. Yi Zhong and Supreme Cloud's cultivations have entered the great circle of the imperishable realm. Blood Dragon, Ancestral Dragon said. When the 9 of them heard this, a trace of bewilderment crept onto their faces. That seems to be the case. The white-robed woman carefully recalled for a moment before looking at the ancestral dragons and saying in a deep voice, "How is this possible? We're all clear about Yi Zhong's situation. Although he has indeed reached the peak of the great success undead stage, it shouldn't be this fast." Ancestral Dragon Golden Dragon said angrily, "There's also Qin Feiyang. He actually reached the half-step invincible realm so quickly. Could it be that the Black Tortoise World's time array is different from what we know?" The woman in white said, "It's different." The ancestral dragons' faces were as dark as water. Their previous joy had already disappeared. The woman in white took a deep breath and said, "It's useless to think so much now. Hurry up and cultivate." Then she looked at the dragons and sighed. "If we can't enter the great circle of the imperishable realm, then not only will we lose face, but Lord Dragon Sovereign will also be angry." The ancestral dragons nodded. The galaxy, the tribulation clouds had already dispersed. The Milky Way became vast and boundless again. However, the lightning power formed by the heavenly tribulation did not dissipate. It surrounded Qin Feiyang. Time passed breath by breath. 3 days later, Qin Feiyang's body and divine soul were finally reconstructed. And it was also at this moment that he officially stepped into the half-step invincible realm. A terrifying aura rolled out in all directions. Hundreds of miles of the starry sky were trembling. Qin Batian and the others had been here to protect Qin Feiyang. Seeing that Qin Feiyang had finally stepped into the imperishable realm, their faces were full of smiles. However, the speed at which Qin Feiyang's body and divine soul were reconstructed surprised them. With Qin Feiyang's current cultivation, it would take at least 10,000 years to reconstruct his body and divine soul. But now it only took him 3 days? Qin Batian said, "It should have something to do with the divine light after the heavenly tribulation." Yes, I heard that after successfully passing the tribulation, there will usually be a ray of auspicious light. And this ray of auspicious light is a reward for the person who passed the tribulation. Now that I look at it, it's true. Yi Zhong nodded and smiled. Qin Batian, Cloud Sovereign, and Beast Sovereign also nodded. Although they were all giants of the ancient world, they were very unfamiliar with the heavenly tribulation. In the past, it was basically hearsay. So before they saw it with their own eyes, they could not be sure of many things. Swoosh! At this moment, Qin Feiyang suddenly opened his eyes. 2 rays of divine light burst out. "How do you feel?" Yi Zhong asked with a smile. "That's great." Qin Feiyang grinned. Yi Zhong shook his head and laughed. "This time, you really profited from a disaster. That's because I didn't give up. If I had given up, I would have been destroyed." Qin Feiyang shook his head and looked at the power of thunder and lightning around him. With a thought, he began to absorb it and continue to refine his body. Another half a day passed. Under the refinement of the power of thunder and lightning, Qin Feiyang's body soared all the way to the supremacy level. In other words, his current physical body and strength were already comparable to that of a supreme-grade artifact. This feeling is so good. Qin Feiyang was overjoyed. What's wrong? Yi Zhong and the others looked at him suspiciously. Let's test my current strength. Qin Feiyang raised his fist and threw it at Qin Batian. Qin Batian was a little confused and hurriedly threw out a palm. The fist and palm met in an instant. Qin Batian was so powerful that even a hasty palm was enough to send Qin Feiyang flying. However, Qin Batian's eyes were full of shock. What's wrong? Yi Zhong, Supremacy Cloud, and Supremacy Beast were even more suspicious. You guys, take a punch from me as well. Qin Feiyang looked at the three of them and threw a punch at them. Bam! Bam! After 3 consecutive collisions, Yi Zhong and the others were dumbfounded. This strength, this physical body, how is it? Qin Feiyang looked at the 4 of them and chuckled. This heavenly tribulation has strengthened your body to this extent. Yi Zhong was stunned. What do you mean by this heavenly tribulation? It's not an exaggeration to say that the power of the last heavenly tribulation has probably reached the level of a great perfection sovereign. Is it strange that a heavenly tribulation of this level has enhanced my physical body to the level of a supreme? Qin Feiyang was speechless. Yi Zhong was stunned. It wasn't strange when he put it that way. Kid, you can do it. With this body of yours, it'll be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with a heaven-defying divine artifact sooner or later. Qin Batian stepped forward and patted Qin Feiyang's shoulder, laughing loudly. Stand shoulder to shoulder with a heaven-defying divine artifact? Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned, as if he had discovered a new continent. Looking at Qin Batian and the others, he asked, can the physical body be cultivated to the level of a heaven-defying divine artifact? The 4 of them were stumped by the question. Qin Batian said, although I said so, I don't know if my physical body can reach this level. Qin Feiyang was stunned. After all, there are too few people who pay attention to physical body cultivation. As far as I know, only Wang Ming does. Wang Ming's physical body is also at the level of a supreme. Qin Batian said, so his physical body is at the level of a supreme. No wonder he's so strong. Qin Feiyang nodded in realization. If you really want to improve your physical body to the level of a heaven-defying divine artifact, I'm afraid you'll have to think of a way yourself. After all, this sort of thing is completely unprecedented. Of course. You can also discuss it with Wang Ming because he's your senior in this aspect and has more experience. Qin Batian said, all right, I'll talk to him when I have time. Qin Feiyang nodded. What about now? Qin Batian asked. Now, Qin Feiyang pondered for a while, then waved his hand and led the 4 of them into the black tortoise world. Feiyang. Accompanied by a fragrant wind, the mermaid princess immediately threw herself into Qin Feiyang's arms. I'm sorry to have worried you. Qin Feiyang said gently. No, it's good that you're fine. The mermaid princess shook her head. Looking at the 2 of them hugging, Yi Shui couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. Young master, you're getting more and more powerful now. Your physical body is on par with mine. Wang Ming said with a smile. Qin Feiyang gently pushed the mermaid princess away and looked at Wang Ming with a smile. Let's talk when we have time. Sure. Wang Ming nodded. Qin Feiyang looked at the little boy and asked, how are the Sunset Bao and the others? Let's not disturb them for now. This time they're really badly injured. It'll be hard for them to recover in a short time. The little boy shook his head. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but frown. If they wanted to break the barrier of divine Dragon Island, they needed the help of these heaven-defying divine artifacts. There's no hurry to deal with the dragons. You just broke through. Stabilize your realm first. At the same time, give everyone some time. For example, Venerable Beast and Frenzy are about to break through, the little boy said. Qin Feiyong looked at Frenzy and Venerable Beast and nodded. Okay, all right then, hurry up and go cultivate. With that, the little boy disappeared without a trace. Everyone also left one after another. Soon, only Qin Batian and the others were left here. Qin Feiyong turned to look at the mermaid princess and said with a smile, I have something to talk to Ancestor about. You go and cultivate too. Okay. The mermaid princess nodded obediently, then turned and left. Ancestor, Master, I heard you say that Venerable Dragon's space-time law has entered the 4th stage? Qin Feiyong looked at Qin Batian and the others and asked. Yes, Qin Batian nodded. So fast? I remember someone saying that she's only at the 3rd stage. Qin Feiyong frowned. It's been many years since Venerable Dragon comprehended the space-time law. Moreover, ever since she stepped into the perfect, imperishable realm, she has been painstakingly comprehending the space-time law. So, I'm afraid that even your ancestor Qin Baishan's understanding of the space-time law is less than 1% of hers. If I'm not wrong, she'll enter the 5th stage in 1,000,000 years at most. As for the 6th stage, I dare not say anything. Yizhong said. Chapter 2898. The 6th stage is the Great Perfection stage. Once she succeeds, she'll officially step into the half-step sovereign realm. We can't let her succeed. Qin Feiyong said. That's true, but who can break through Ice Dragon's barrier on Divine Dragon Island? And don't forget, it's been more than a decade since your last battle with the dragons. The sovereign divine domain can be opened again. Forget Ice Dragon's barrier, even if the dragons open their sovereign divine domain. Breaking through it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Yizhong said. That makes sense. Qin Batian nodded. Although the dragons are wary of us, we are also wary of the dragons. To be honest, no one can be certain of the outcome of this battle. Sovereign Beast shook his head. Cloud Sovereign said, I don't think so. In my opinion, the dragons have a higher chance of winning. After all, a sovereign divine weapon is a goal we can't surpass. Wrong. Qin Feiyong shook his head. What's wrong? Cloud Sovereign was suspicious. Qin Feiyong said, They have a sovereign divine weapon, but we also have a trump card. Cloud Sovereign was stunned. What trump card can compare to a sovereign divine weapon? The Slaughter Domain. Although the Slaughter Domain's power has never reached the level of a sovereign divine weapon, I firmly believe that as long as there is enough blood, it can be done. Qin Feiyong's brows were filled with confidence. Cloud Sovereign fell silent. If the Slaughter Domain could really reach that level, there was hope for them to deal with the dragons. Qin Feiyong looked at Yizhong and asked, Master, didn't I ask Fire Lotus to help me collect blood? How is it going? This old man didn't bother with this matter, so I don't know the details, but I heard that a lot of blood has been collected. Yizhong said. Qin Feiyong hurriedly asked, Then where is the blood now? The Western region. I heard from Fire Lotus that the Western region's plate is the largest. So, she asked Pai Lupi and Theta Wong to help her move all the living creatures in the Western region to the other 3 regions. The Western regions are specifically used to store blood. Furthermore, regardless of whether it is the creatures of the Black Tortoise world or the ancient world, they are all very enthusiastic about donating blood. City lords like Jiang Dafei have also collected a lot of blood. Yizhong said. The Western regions, Qin Feiyong murmured. Closing his eyes, he sent his perception into the Western domain. Immediately, a magnificent scene appeared in front of his eyes. At this moment, the entire Western region had become a sea of blood that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was hard to imagine how much blood there was. How is it? Yizhong smiled and asked, Qin Feiyang opened his eyes and said with a smile, Fire Lotus's efficiency is indeed different. According to my estimation, the blood in the western regions is enough for me to start 1,000 slaughters, and it will be the second stage of slaughters. Cloud Supreme asked, Is there a chance of reaching the level of a sovereign artifact? I'm not sure about that. Because I've never been there, I don't know how much blood is needed. Qin Feiyang shook his head. That is to say, it's still unknown whether it can reach the level of a sovereign artifact? Cloud Supreme frowned. Qin Feiyang nodded. Cloud Supreme said. Then continue to store more blood. Qin Feiyang nodded. Looking at Yi Zhong, he asked, Master, you've been meditating for so long. Have you reached the third stage? Not yet. However, after these years of meditation and discussions with Sovereign Beast, I've improved a lot. This old man estimates that I should be able to reach the third stage in less than 10,000 years. Yi Zhong smiled. Qin Feiyang smiled. 10,000 years in the Black Tortoise world is only 10 days in the outside world. Yi Zhong smiled, so there's still time. What about you guys? Qin Feiyang looked at Cloud Supreme. Sovereign Beast. This sovereign situation is similar to Yi Zhong's. But now this sovereign's priority is to step into the great circle of the imperishable realm. Sovereign Beast said. Cloud Supreme said, This sovereign's law of water is about to enter the third stage. The law of water, Qin Feiyang murmured, shaking his head with a smile. You guys are all monsters. None of the 10 ancestral dragons have comprehended the power of law, but all of you have. We're monsters. Kid, doesn't your conscience hurt? Who's the real monster here? You haven't even entered the imperishable realm, yet you've already comprehended 3 types of law, including one of the strongest laws, the law of karma. Cloud Supreme rolled his eyes. It can't be helped. My luck is too good. Qin Feiyang chuckled. Cloud Supreme pursed his lips. It can't be helped. You have the right to be proud of 3 types of law. Qin Feiyang smiled embarrassedly and looked at Qin Batian. Ancestor, your law of time and space has already reached the third stage? Yes. Qin Batian nodded. Qin Feiyang immediately looked at Yi Zhong and the other 2 and chuckled. It seems that you guys aren't as good as Ancestor. The 3 couldn't help smiling wryly when they heard this. The old one was so monster, and the young one was also so monster. The Qin clan was really enviable. All right then, you guys continue chatting. I'll go ask Wang Ming for advice. With that, Qin Feiyang got up and entered the castle's cultivation room to take the Ring of Cosmos. When he was transcending the tribulation, he had sent the Ring of Cosmos into the castle's cultivation room. After taking the Ring of Cosmos, he entered a cultivation room on the 2nd floor. There were 3 people in this cultivation room. They were Li Changhe, Wang Daoyuan, and Yang Li. Li Changhe and Wang Daoyuan were also working hard to break through to the half-step invincible level. Young Lord! Seeing Qin Feiyang appear, the 3 immediately opened their eyes and bowed. Qin Feiyang looked at Li Changhe and Wang Daoyuan and smiled. It's fine. You guys continue. Okay. The 2 nodded and sat cross-legged on the ground again to continue cultivating. Qin Feiyang looked at Yan Li and asked curiously, Yan Li, what kind of law did you inherit from the temple? The law of metal. Yan Li scratched his head and answered a little embarrassedly. That's a good thing. Why are you embarrassed? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. It's good, but I don't have the right to be proud in front of you. You're someone who has mastered 3 types of law. Yan Li said with admiration. Haha, Qin Feiyang laughed and said, Actually, mastering 1 type of law is enough. After all, compared to Wang Ming, you already have the right to step into the Dominator realm. Dominator realm? Yan Li was slightly taken aback and smiled bitterly. To be honest, even if I have the law of metal now, I don't have the confidence to step into the Dominator realm. That's not a good attitude. After all, you have to have confidence in yourself, Qin Feiyang said unhappily. Young lord is right. Yang Li nodded repeatedly. Okay, then work hard. By the way, where's Wang Ming? I remember that he used to be in this cultivation room. Qin Feiyang glanced around the cultivation room and said suspiciously. Yang Li said, he stopped cultivating in seclusion after breaking through to the great success, invincible stage. Then where did he go? Qin Feiyang was puzzled. He went to comprehend the law of metal. Seeing that I've mastered the law of metal, he's very anxious now. Yang Li smiled. How can he be anxious about this? Qin Feiyang shook his head and released his perception. He quickly found Wang Ming and then looked at Yang Li, then continue. Try to break through to the great success, invincible stage before the battle. Okay. Yang Li nodded. Qin Feiyang disappeared in a flash. At the same time, eastern region, on a mountain peak, a middle-aged man stood and looked at the mountains and rivers in front of him with a worried face. This person was Wang Ming. After leaving the Devil's Land, he came here aimlessly. Needless to say, the thing that made him worried was definitely the power of laws. What's wrong? Qin Feiyang appeared next to Wang Ming out of thin air and asked with a smile. Wang Ming was stunned, then hurriedly turned and said respectfully, Greetings, young lord. Qin Feiyang looked at him and smiled. It's because of the law of metal, right? Yes. Wang Ming nodded. After pondering for a moment, he looked down at the mountains and rivers below and sighed. After breaking through to the great success, invincible stage, I left the Devil's Land and have been walking in the secular world. But until now, I haven't gained anything at all. Speaking of this, Wang Ming looked up at Qin Feiyang and asked, Young lord, do I not have this talent at all? How can you be anxious about this? The law of metal is something that can only be chanced upon and not sought. Qin Feiyang smiled slightly. I know that, but seeing that Yang Li has the law of metal, I can't help but feel anxious. Wang Ming looked disappointed. Qin Feiyang asked, Then why do you want to compare yourself with Yang Li? Wang Ming wanted to say something, but stopped. Actually, I know what you're thinking now. You and Yang Li followed me together, and your strength has always been on par. But now Yang Li has obtained the legacy and mastered the law of metal, so you're feeling the pressure. Furthermore, in your heart, you're still thinking, now that Yang Li has obtained the law of metal, as the young lord, I'll definitely pay more attention to him. Because his future is better, he'll slowly neglect you. Am I right? Qin Feiyang said. Wang Ming smiled, embarrassedly admitting it. Actually, you don't have to put these psychological burdens on yourself at all. Whether or not you comprehend the law of metal in the future, you'll always be my partner, Qin Feiyang. Remember, we're partners, not superiors and subordinates. Qin Feiyang smiled. Young lord, Wang Ming stared blankly at Qin Feiyang. Actually, I'm also responsible. If you hadn't chosen to self-detonate to save me back then, you would have been able to enter the temple and obtain the legacy of the law of metal. Qin Feiyang sighed. No. Protecting young lord is what I should do. Wang Ming hurriedly waved his hands. There's nothing you should do in this world, only whether you're willing or not. So, I'm very grateful to you for being willing to follow me through thick and thin. Really, if you hadn't risked your life to save me back then, I would have definitely died at the hands of the fire dragon. Qin Feiyang said. Wang Ming nodded slightly, feeling a little embarrassed for a moment. Whether it's you, Yang Li, Li Changhe, or Wang Daoyuan, you're all a part of my life now. In my eyes, you're all equal. So in the future, don't let your imagination run wild and put a lot of pressure on yourself. Qin Feiyang glared at Wang Ming angrily. Okay, Wang Ming nodded. As for the law of metal, you really can't force it. Sometimes, when the opportunity comes, you can comprehend it with an epiphany. Qin Feiyang said. Wang Ming asked, Then, Do you have any experience you can impart to me? Experience, Qin Feiyang murmured with a smile. One word, quiet. Quiet? Wang Ming was stunned. Chapter 2899. Yes. Calm. It's only when you truly calm down that you'll be able to see through the surface of all things and see the mysteries within. It's only when you calm down that you'll have the chance to enter a state of epiphany. Qin Feiyang said. I see. Wang Ming nodded in realization. I was wondering why I didn't gain anything all these years. So it's because of my impatience. No matter how good the conditions are, an impatient person will never amount to anything. That's the state of mind. Talent is actually secondary. For a cultivator, the most important thing is the state of mind. Qin Feiyang said. I understand. Wang Ming nodded. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment before saying, There's one more thing. Look more, and think more. I understand that. Enter the secular world more. Look, think, and understand the deepest mysteries within. Wang Ming said, Yes, everything in the world originates from the secular world. Only by seeing through the secular world and comprehending the various forms of life can you attain Tao. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly. Thank you for your teachings, young master. Wang Ming bowed. I'm just speaking from experience. It's not much of a lesson. Speaking of which, how did you temper your fleshly body in the past? How did you reach the paragon level? Qin Feiyang was curious. This, Wang Ming pondered for a moment before saying, To be honest, young master, I actually have a divine art that specializes in tempering the body. A divine art that specializes in tempering the body? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Yes, this divine art is called Emperor Ming's body tempering technique. I created it myself, and it's divided into 7 realms. It corresponds to the level of a divine weapon. The first realm corresponds to an inferior divine weapon. The second realm corresponds to a medium divine weapon, and so on. The 7th realm corresponds to a supreme level divine weapon. Wang Ming said, You created it yourself? Qin Feiyang was surprised. Yes, I've been interested in tempering my body since I was young. So, after I became a war god, I began to study it. After hundreds of thousands of years, I finally created the Emperor Ming body tempering technique. The effect is pretty good. Wang Ming laughed proudly. To be able to create a deity art, and a body refining art at that, he indeed had the right to be proud. I see. Qin Feiyang nodded in realization and asked, Then can this Emperor Ming's body refining technique upgrade the physical body to the heaven-defying level? Heaven-defying level? Wang Ming laughed bitterly and said, How could I have that ability? Supreme level is already my limit. Qin Feiyang could not help but feel a little disappointed when he heard that. He asked, Have you ever thought of upgrading your physical body to the heaven-defying level? Of course I have, but at the moment it seems impossible. Unless, when Wang Ming said this, his eyes shone brightly. Unless what? Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Unless I upgrade the Emperor Ming's body refining technique to the heaven-defying deity art. Because the current Emperor Ming's body refining technique is only a supreme level deity art. If I upgrade the Emperor Ming's body refining technique to the heaven-defying deity art, I think I should be able to upgrade the strength of my physical body to the heaven-defying level. Wang Ming said, Heaven-defying deity art, Qin Feiyang murmured and shook his head with a sigh. I'm afraid that's as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Definitely harder than ascending to the heavens. For the time being, I don't have this idea. Wang Ming shook his head. All right, this matter can't be rushed. Take it slow. Qin Feiyang smiled. Wang Ming nodded. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, Then you continue. I'll go back to the devil's land first to comprehend the power of the 3 laws. Okay. Wang Ming nodded again. Qin Feiyang took a step forward and disappeared without a trace. Wang Ming retracted his gaze and looked at the mountains and rivers in front of him, murmuring, "Come, then let's calm down first." Then, he also took a step forward and disappeared step by step. The Devil's Land. Qin Feiyang entered the cultivation room and stood quietly at the side, looking at Dan Wangkai, who was completely focused on refining pills. After a while, Dan Wangkai finally stopped. "Young master, when did you come?" When he saw Qin Feiyang beside him, Dan Wangkai was immediately stunned. "I've been here for a while." Qin Feiyang smiled, stepped forward and grabbed the pill. Looking at the 4 dragon-shaped pilchi on it, he said, "You've improved a lot." Hee. Dan Wangkai scratched his head and laughed foolishly. Qin Feiyang threw the pill to Dan Wangkai and shook his head. "You should also hurry up and cultivate. Don't just focus on refining pills all day." Dan Wangkai was startled and said, "Cultivation is so boring." "Cultivation is boring?" Qin Feiyang was startled and said speechlessly, "Go out and take a look who isn't cultivating desperately now. You're the only one who's so calm." Dan Wangkai said helplessly, "It's not like you don't know my ambition is not here. I know you like to refine pills, but you can't ignore your cultivation. Strength is the most important thing. Without powerful strength, no matter how talented you are in alchemy, you'll just be making a wedding dress for others." Qin Feiyang said. "What do you mean?" Dan Wangkai was suspicious. "Think about it. If you're alone now, when people from some big forces find out that you can refine a divine pill with 4 dragon-shaped pill chi, what will they do?" Qin Feiyang asked. "Then he must be very respectful towards me." Dan Wangkai didn't even think before replying. "Wrong." Qin Feiyang shook his head. "Wrong." Dan Wangkai was slightly taken aback and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" "Under the premise of respect, you have to have powerful strength to rely on. Look at you now. You're only at the peak of the 9 heavens realm. With this cultivation, what can you do? If you're really alone now, facing the big forces of the ancient world, you have no right to choose at all. You can only obediently work for them and refine pills. Otherwise, you'll die." Qin Feiyang glared at him angrily. "That's an assumption. The reality is, with big shots like you around, who dares to touch me?" Dan Wangkai said. "Why can't you listen to me? What if one day you become a person? Can you still rely on us?" Qin Feiyang was speechless. "Become a person?" Dan Wangkai was shocked and said in a panic, "Young master, are you going to abandon me?" Qin Feiyang rubbed his forehead and said, "I'm saying what if?" "There's no what if. I've already made up my mind to pester you for the rest of my life." Dan Wangkai chuckled. Following Qin Feiyang was so good. He didn't have to worry about herbs, furnace, or fire. He just had to focus on refining pills. How could there be such good conditions? Qin Feiyang's mouth twitched and said, "I'm not a girl. Why are you pestering me?" "I'll pester you," Dan Wangkai said. "You still have a reason, don't you? Believe it or not, I'll throw you out and let you die on your own right now." Qin Feiyang's face darkened. What a stubborn guy. Don't. Didn't you say that I'm so weak? How can I survive if you throw me out alone? Fine, I'll go cultivate now. I won't come out until I break through to the imperishable realm. Dan Wangkai's face was full of helplessness. Who would force someone to cultivate? "That's what you said," Qin Feiyang said. I said it. Dan Wangkai nodded. Qin Feiyang smiled and said, "That's more like it. Then go." "Okay." Dan Wangkai nodded and reluctantly looked at the netherworld demonic flame and the heaven flame divine furnace, then turned and walked out of the cultivation room. "Even I have to force them to cultivate? What kind of guys are they, worrying about me all day long?" Qin Feiyang shook his head helplessly and suddenly saw a dozen interspatial rings next to the furnace. He suspiciously stepped forward. grabbed the interspatial rings, and checked them one by one. He was immediately stunned. These interspatial rings were actually filled to the brim with pills. There were divine life pills, spiritual sea pills, heaven spirit pills, divine power pills, and so on. And all of them had 4 veins. Young master, those pills are prepared for your battle with the dragons. Suddenly, Dan Wangkai poked his head out of the door and stared at Qin Feiyong with a smile. Still here? Qin Feiyong turned and stared at him. Dan Wangkai smiled embarrassedly and immediately turned and slipped away. Qin Feiyong shook his head and looked at the dozen interspatial rings again with a smile on his face. This guy was really considerate, putting down the interspatial rings. Qin Feiyong waved his hand and closed the stone door. Then he sat on the ground with his legs crossed. Boom! At that moment, 3 flames appeared and floated in front of Qin Feiyong. They were the law of light, the law of karma, and the law of thunder. Although Qin Feiyong had comprehended the law of light and the law of karma for a long time, because he was immersed in cultivation, these 2 laws had been at the beginner level. But now, he had finally broken through to the half-step invincible realm. It was time to study it. The law of light drove away the darkness and represented hope, the law of karma. There is cause and effect, represented the cycle of karma. The law of thunder washed away the evil, represented the righteous aura. But these were just the beginner-level profound meanings. What were the deeper profound meanings? Qin Feiyong pondered. Gradually, his whole body and mind entered a state of selflessness, and his mind was constantly evolving the profound meanings of the 3 kinds of laws. Time passed quietly. Boom! One day, a terrifying aura erupted from the ancient castle. The owner of this aura was Yang Li. That's right. Yang Li also stepped into the greater mastery, undead realm. Soon, another even more terrifying aura emerged. The owner of this aura was Sovereign Beast. He also broke through to the great perfection, undead realm. Another period of time passed. Every few days, a powerful aura would erupt from the Devil's Land. For example, White-Eyed Wolf, Mermaid Princess, Zhao Tailai, Blood Qilin, Li Changha, Devil Ancestor, and others had all stepped into the half-step invincible realm. The foundation of the Devil's Land was getting stronger day by day. It was the same in Zhongzhou. The Ice Emperor and the Rain Emperor had both stepped into the greater mastery undead realm. Almost all of the 108 generals had stepped into the lesser mastery undead realm. There was also Qin Batian and Lu Zhenyang, who had opened the door of potential. Their cultivation speed was faster than Sovereign Beast, Cloud Sovereign, and Yizhong. Therefore, they also caught up with the 3 of them and entered the great perfection undead realm. In this way, the Black Tortoise realm already had 5 great perfection undead realm powerhouses. In addition to the greater mastery undead realm, lesser mastery undead realm, lesser mastery undead realm, and half-step undead realm, the number of great powerhouses in the Black Tortoise realm had reached thousands. However, most of these thousands of great powerhouses belonged to the Dragon Slayer Palace. After all, the foundation of the Dragon Slayer Palace was better than the Black Tortoise realm. Chapter 2900. No one knew how much time had passed. Suddenly, one day, an incomparably sacred aura roared out from the ancient castle and headed straight for the sky. This phenomenon immediately alarmed many people. Everyone came out of seclusion and looked up at the sky. Gradually, pure white, auspicious clouds surged above the sky, followed by a rain of light full of sacred aura. That scene looked as if a god was about to descend to the mortal world. Boom! Suddenly, a bright, divine light rushed out from the ancient castle and rushed into the sky. Immediately after, with a loud clang, a pure white long sword appeared out of thin air. The long sword was thousands of feet long, and its entire body was suffused with sacred light, illuminating the 9 heavens. What is this? Everyone looked at the long sword in surprise. This long sword was at the top of the sky, but it did not emit a terrifying aura, nor did it have a shocking sharpness. However, it carried a sacred aura that made people tremble, as if it was the incarnation of a god. Esoteric ability, sort of light, suddenly. In the ancient castle, an ethereal voice sounded. The next moment, Qin Feiyang appeared at the top of the clouds, grabbed the long sword, and slashed at the sky in front of him. Boom! The sky of the Devil's Land suddenly began to collapse crazily. That scene was like the end of the world. Esoteric ability, sort of light. Looking at this scene, Yi Zhong, Sovereign Beast, and Supreme Cloud below couldn't help but tremble. This was the first esoteric ability of the Law of Light. Sort of light. It was like the incarnation of an angel, obliterating all evil. At the top of the clouds, Qin Feiyang glanced at the collapsing sky with a trace of joy in his eyes. The power of this esoteric ability was beyond his imagination. According to his judgment, it could compete with a heaven-defying technique. It was no wonder that so many people in the world yearned for the Law of Light, because mastering a Law of Light was equivalent to possessing a heaven-defying technique. What is this? When your Law of Light reaches the peak, even a heaven-defying technique can only flatter you. The little boy appeared out of thin air and looked at Qin Feiyang indifferently. Really? Qin Feiyang was bewildered, ignorant. The little boy rolled his eyes, and then he glanced at the collapsed sky and said angrily, "Can you not behave atrociously for no reason? Do you know how much origin energy is needed to repair this?" Ugh! Qin Feiyang was stunned. Could it be that this little brat ran out not to congratulate him but to scold him? "You're always causing trouble for me." The little boy glared at Qin Feiyang and disappeared without a trace. Qin Feiyang smiled embarrassedly, but before he could be happy, he was scolded by the little brat. Wait a minute. That's not right. It seemed like he was the true ruler of the Black Tortoise world. What the hell was going on? The dignified ruler of the Black Tortoise world was actually bullied by a little brat all day long. Qin Feiyang shook his head, and the sword of light in his hand dissipated, and then he landed in front of the ancient castle with a single step. Yi Zhong walked over and looked at Qin Feiyang as if he was looking at a monster, and said, "You're too fast!" Fast? Qin Feiyang was stunned. Of course. Only 10,000 years have passed in the Black Tortoise world since you began to comprehend the Law of Light. In 10,000 years, you've raised the Law of Light to the initial stage. Isn't that fast? You should know that when this old man raised the Law of Fire from the initial stage to the initial stage, it took me hundreds of thousands of years. Yi Zhong shook his head. Comparisons are odious. This saying was indeed true. We're about the same. Beside him, Revered Beast and Revered Cloud nodded. Hearing you say that, I think it's really quite fast, Qin Feiyang said in a daze. Nonsense. The three of them rolled their eyes at him. That's not right. Senior Brother Looney only took him a few thousand years to comprehend the Law of Slaughter to the initial stage. Now, I actually need 10,000 years of time. Compared to him, I'm really too slow. Qin Feiyang frowned. Was his comprehension not as good as Senior Brother Looney's? A few thousand years? Yi Zhong and the others were stunned. They looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure." He said it himself. Qin Feiyang nodded, then looked at Revered Cloud and said, "When you fought him outside Fallen Valley, didn't you personally experience it?" "I did experience his Law of Slaughter at that time, but I didn't know that his Law of Slaughter had already reached the initial stage of the second stage." The Chief Pavilion Master shook his head. "You didn't know?" Qin Feiyang was startled. After thinking carefully for a moment, he slapped his head in realization and said with a smile, "He only said that after you were killed." Wang Ming and Yang Li knew about it because they were both present at that time. "So you didn't trick us?" Revered Cloud asked. Qin Feiyang said with a wry smile, "You're all supreme experts of the perfect imperishable stage. I wouldn't dare trick you even if I'd borrowed courage from the heavens. He reached the second stage of the law of slaughter a few thousand years ago. How frightening is his comprehension! The three of them looked at each other. Before, they had only thought that Looney was monstrous, but they didn't expect his comprehension to be so amazing. He's actually slower than senior brother Looney. It seems that I have to work harder in the future, Qin Feiyang murmured. You're not slow either, okay? Yi Zhong was helpless. Something suddenly occurred to revered Cloud. He looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, Qin Feiyang, are you comprehending 3 laws at the same time? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded, then shook his head regretfully. Unfortunately, I've only reached the second stage of the law of light. That's right. You're definitely slower than Looney if you're comprehending 3 laws at the same time. How can you do 3 things at the same time? Revered Cloud was speechless. Qin Feiyang was taken aback. If that's the case, I'm about the same as senior brother Looney? We don't know much about little Looney, so we don't know how long he took. But your speed is already shocking enough. And this little Looney is also a monstrous genius. Revered Cloud shook his head. Yi Zhong and Revered Beast smiled bitterly. They felt helpless facing these 2 young people. Don't be envious. After all, there's a saying that the new generation excels the old. Qin Feiyang smiled smugly. Scram! Yi Zhong's face darkened. Qin Feiyang chuckled and ran into the castle, continuing to comprehend the law of thunder and the law of karma. This brat, Yi Zhong shook his head and laughed. Then he looked at Revered Cloud and Revered Beast and said bitterly, we really have to work harder. Otherwise, we'll be surpassed by these little guys soon. Hearing this, Revered Cloud and Revered Beast smiled bitterly. Boom! Time flew by. Suddenly, one day, a terrifying aura erupted from the bottom of the herb field. At the same time, the originally clear sky was instantly covered by blood clouds. The power of thunder and lightning flashed crazily, exuding a destructive power. What's going on? Everyone ran out and looked at this scene in surprise. This seems to be another heavenly tribulation. What the hell? Who is it? Rolling tribulation clouds and terrifying thunder and lightning. What else could it be but a heavenly tribulation? This, Qin Feiyang also ran out of the castle and looked at this scene in surprise. Haha, I'm finally going to step into the half-step invincible realm. Suddenly, the madman burst out from the ground with an arrogant laugh. Boom! Crack! The moment Looney appeared, the aura of the heavenly tribulation immediately shrouded him. Ah! Looney looked at the sky in shock and murmured, Is this a heavenly tribulation? Nonsense. If this isn't a heavenly tribulation, then what is? Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes. Fuck, I'm actually going to transcend a heavenly tribulation? No, I've been innocent all my life and I've done good things. How can there be a heavenly tribulation? Looney scratched his head. What you mean is that I'm an unforgivable villain and should be struck by a heavenly tribulation. Qin Feiyang raised his eyebrows. More or less. Looney nodded. Get lost. Qin Feiyang's face was dark. Didn't he know what kind of person he was? And he still had the nerve to call him a villain. I say, can you 2 be more serious? Everyone looked at Qin Feiyang and Looney speechlessly. The heavenly tribulation was already here, and they were still in the mood to bicker. They really admired their mentality. It seems like it's really my heavenly tribulation. Looney looked at the sky and murmured to himself. Boom! Woo! Thunder rumbled and the wind howled. The heavenly tribulation covered all directions. Another one is going to transcend a heavenly tribulation. What kind of monsters are these? The little boy appeared and complained in dissatisfaction. He shouted at Qin Feiyang. What are you standing there for? Hurry up and send him out. Okay. Qin Feiyang nodded. With a wave of his hand, He brought Looney out of the Black Tortoise world and appeared in the Star River. Because he entered the Black Tortoise world in the Star River, he naturally appeared in the Star River now. The heavenly tribulation also appeared in the Star River. Let's go to the Divine Dragon Island first. Looney glanced at the Star River and said to Qin Feiyong, "Why are we going to the Divine Dragon Island?" Qin Feiyong was suspicious. "Nonsense. Of course, it's to provoke them." Looney chuckled. Qin Feiyong shook his head, speechlessly. The two flashed out of the Star River and flew toward the Divine Dragon Island below. When Qin Feiyong was transcending a heavenly tribulation, the divine artifacts forcefully shattered the barrier of the divine land, and Long Zuin didn't repair it. So now there was no barrier in the divine land. What's going on? The Mermaid Emperor opened his eyes and looked at the sky in shock. Whoosh! Suddenly, he noticed two figures descending from the sky and hurriedly went up. "Feiyong, what's going on?" "It's Looney," Qin Feiyong said. "Looney is also transcending a heavenly tribulation." The Mermaid Emperor looked at Looney in shock. "Don't be envious. This is something you can't get." Looney grinned. The Mermaid Emperor's face twitched. Who would be envious of such a thing? Qin Feiyong shook his head and looked at Looney. "Be serious. This is the heavenly tribulation of the imperishable realm." Looney said, "But you have to believe that it's definitely not as terrifying as your heavenly tribulation. You know." Qin Feiyong rolled his eyes. "Of course you can think of that. I'm such a good person. How could God bear to kill me?" Looney rubbed his chin narcissistically. Qin Feiyong looked at the sky speechlessly. What kind of person is this? There should be a limit to narcissism. The Mermaid Emperor asked, "Then where are you going to transcend the heavenly tribulation?" "Where are we going to transcend the heavenly tribulation?" Looney and Qin Feiyong looked at each other and smiled at the same time. Swish! Qin Feiyong waved his hand and a figure appeared. It was Qin Batian. "Ancestor, take us to the sky above the Divine Dragon Island," Qin Feiyong said. When Qin Batian heard this, he too was stunned. Looney chuckled and said, "Let the dragons be envious." Envious? Qin Batian was speechless. As for the Mermaid Emperor, he didn't know how to describe his feelings at this moment. He already said that no one would be envious of this heavenly tribulation. Why didn't he believe him? Okay. Qin Batian shook his head, opened a space crack, and rushed in with the two of them. Chapter 2901. Above Divine Dragon Island. Boom! Crack! The wind and clouds surged, thunder and lightning roared, instantly alarming all the dragons. What's going on? Everyone ran out and looked at the sky suspiciously. Why does it look like a heavenly tribulation again? It doesn't look like one. It's a heavenly tribulation. Who's going through a tribulation again? Look, isn't that Qin Feiyong and Qin Batian? Could it be Qin Feiyong's tribulation again? Soon, everyone saw Qin Feiyong and the other two standing in the sky, and their eyes were filled with surprise. "Qin Batian, Qin Feiyong, don't go too far!" With a roar, the ancestral dragons rushed out from their respective clans. Once was fine, but a second time? Did they think that the dragons didn't exist? Lunatic. When he saw Lunatic, the dragon god was stunned, then his face was filled with anger as he roared, "You little bastard! How dare you come to Divine Dragon Island?" Lunatic was stunned, then he looked at the ancestral dragon and grinned. "Isn't this master? This disciple pays his respects to you, senior." What? He called Lord Ancestral Dragon's master. Why didn't we know that Lord Ancestral Dragon had a disciple before? Everyone was surprised, but the Ancestral Dragon's face was extremely ugly, because when he looked at Lunatic, he remembered what happened in the Nether King's hell. "Master, don't be so cold. After all, we still have a master and disciple relationship." Lunatic smiled. The ancestral dragon's face was gloomy as he clenched his fists tightly, making cracking sounds. Swish! Above the dragon palace, the dragons, princess dragons, and prince also appeared. Looking at Qin Feiyang and the other two, the dragons and princess dragons had ugly expressions like the other ancestral dragons. The prince of the dragon clan frowned. Why is he going through a tribulation again? Could it be that he had broken through to the initial imperishable realm so quickly? Madman glanced at Dragon Island and took out his yin and yang ring. He threw it to Qin Feiyang and said, "Back off." With a wave of his hand, Qin Batian took Qin Feiyang and retreated like lightning. It's not Qin Feiyang's tribulation. Seeing Qin Feiyang retreat, everyone's eyes locked onto Madman. First, it was Qin Feiyang's tribulation. Now it's my tribulation. Are you envious? Madman looked down at the divine Dragon Island and chuckled. Jealous? Everyone was stunned. He must be an idiot. Who would envy the heavenly tribulation? Ignorant. Don't you understand that only true monsters will have heavenly tribulations? In other words, Laozi and Qin Feiyang are such monsters. As for you dragons, you don't even have a single person who has transcended the tribulation. Needless to say, you're all useless trash. Madman laughed. You're courting death. The ancestral dragons were enraged. Not only did he come to transcend the tribulation twice, he even insulted the dragons. The dragons had been in the ancient world for countless years. When had anyone dared to provoke them so blatantly? What? You're not convinced? Come. Let me see you transcend the tribulation too. Madman looked at the 10 ancestral dragons with disdain. The 10 ancestral dragons clenched their fists and their eyes spat fire. If looks could kill, Madman would have died many times over. Rumble. The heavenly tribulation in the sky was still brewing, and the power it emitted became more and more terrifying. Qin Feiyang said in surprise, "It doesn't seem to be any weaker than my heavenly tribulation." Yes, Qin Batian nodded and frowned. "But I don't understand. Why does he have a heavenly tribulation too?" Qin Feiyang was also confused. Suddenly he thought of something and said, "Is it related to his evil power?" Evil power? Qin Batian was stunned. Yes, after Senior Brother Madman entered the Nether King's hell, all his divine power turned into evil power. This might be the reason why he is transcending the tribulation. Qin Feiyang said in a deep voice, "If that's the case, then his situation is definitely worse than yours, because evil power is not tolerated by heaven and earth. And the heavenly tribulation is the nemesis of evil power." Qin Batian said. Qin Feiyang heard this and suddenly shivered. That's right. The heavenly tribulation was the nemesis of evil, and Senior Brother Madman was almost the embodiment of evil power. Then wouldn't it be even more dangerous for him to face the heavenly tribulation? However, Madman didn't seem to realize the danger. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the sky above the dragon palace. He glanced at the dragons and Princess Longzun, then directly looked at the Prince Longzun and asked, "You are that prince?" "That's me." The Prince Long dragons nodded. Madman said, "I heard from Qin Feiyang that you are very interested in this father." "Interested in you?" The Prince Long dragons was stunned. "This father also heard that your heavenly dragon domain is the same as this father's blood demon domain, able to cause the opponent's cultivation to drop by 5 small realms?" Madman said. A look of realization appeared in the eyes of the Prince Long dragons as he asked, "You are the one called Madman?" "That's right, this father." Madman nodded. "So it's you." The Prince Long dragons sized up Madman and laughed. "I am indeed very interested in you." "Ha. Qin Feiyang really didn't lie to this father. You are indeed an exception in the dragons. Just you wait. After this father finishes his tribulation, I will properly train with you." Madman laughed, looked up at the sky, and shouted, "Damn heavens, don't dawdle, come quickly!" This guy is openly challenging the heavens. Damn. He is even more arrogant than Qin Feiyang. The dragons looked at each other, crack, as if it really felt the provocation of Madman. Accompanied by a deafening sound, a blood-colored tribulation descended. The corner of Madman's mouth lifted as he looked at the black dragon ancestor dragon and laughed. "Master, please wait and see. This disciple will definitely make you proud." As soon as his words fell, boom! Dazzling golden divine light roared out of his body. A monstrous might also shrouded all directions. This is a heaven-defying divine art. The Prince Long Dragon's pupils suddenly shrank. He didn't expect Madman to also have a heaven-defying divine art. The golden divine light roared in all directions, turning into a terrifying wave that shattered the sky as it blasted toward the tribulation. Boom! Under the shocked gazes of countless dragons, the tribulation was instantly shattered by the golden divine light. What the hell is this? It can even shatter the tribulation. Isn't it too strong? The divine Dragon Island was in an uproar. Whether it was the dragons or the 1,000,000 humans that surrendered to the dragons, they were all dumbfounded. This is a heaven-defying divine art. Wang Chong stood in the sky above the cultivation ground and looked at Madman in the sky as he muttered, "What? This person also has a heaven-defying divine art? Why haven't I heard of his name before?" Someone was surprised. "Not just you guys. Even us from the Northern Dragon God Palace don't know much about this person. We just know that he is with Qin Feiyang. Ever since he entered the Northern Dragon God Palace, he has only made a move once. At that time, there was a person called Gu Fan who relied on his supreme divine art to bring people to challenge Qin Feiyang. It was this madman who killed Gu Fan in one move. After that, that madman never appeared again. Thus, there are very, very few records regarding him. But I didn't expect him to be so strong," someone said in disbelief. "Looking at the way Madman and Qin Feiyang interact, they shouldn't have a superior and subordinate relationship. Yes, they must be friends. To be able to become Qin Feiyang's friend, needless to say, this person is definitely not simple." The people in the cultivation area were discussing animatedly, but the ancestral dragons knew Madman's methods, because even they had suffered a lot under Madman's hands back in Fallen Valley. After the heavenly tribulation dissipated, Madman laughed and looked down at the ancestral dragon. "Master, how is it? I didn't embarrass you, right?" "Yes." "You are amazing. I am really proud of you." The ancestral dragon gritted his teeth and said word by word, "They are really master and disciple. What's going on?" "Madman is Qin Feiyang's friend, and Qin Feiyang is the enemy of the dragons. How could the enemy of the dragons become the disciple of Lord Ancestral Dragon?" Everyone was confused. "Haha, thank you for your praise, Master. This disciple will continue to work hard and live up to your expectations." Madman laughed loudly. Looking at the ancestral dragon's face that was getting uglier and uglier, he couldn't help but feel happy. Bastard! The ancestral dragon almost went crazy. If not for the dragon sovereign watching from above the dragon palace, he would have already killed his way out. Boom! Soon, the second heavenly tribulation descended. Madman stood proudly in the sky, his entire body emitting a dazzling golden light. When the second heavenly tribulation descended, the golden light suddenly formed a golden barrier. Boom! The heavenly tribulation struck the barrier, causing an apocalyptic shockwave to erupt, shattering the sky. However, the barrier didn't shatter. This daddy will also try using this heavenly tribulation to temper my body. The madman grinned, and a strand of lightning energy passed through the barrier and was caught by the madman. "Kacha! When it came into contact with the lightning, Madman's hand shattered on the spot, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. So strong! Madman was dumbfounded. Qin Feiyang's eyelids twitched as he hurriedly roared. Don't mess around. This is the heavenly tribulation, the nemesis of evil power. It will pose a fatal threat to you. He never would have thought that this guy would be so daring to come into contact with the heavenly tribulation at such a close distance. Wasn't this courting death? This daddy can't afford to lose face like this. Since you can do it, this daddy can definitely do it too. Madman pursed his lips and then directly sucked that wisp of lightning into his body. Immediately, Madman's skin and flesh were torn open as blood flowed out. Although it was only a wisp of lightning, it was like 1,000 soldiers and horses, crazily destroying his body. Is it really this daddy's nemesis? No, this daddy is a madman. How can I have a nemesis? Madman roared, but the result was that he actually refined the lightning. His body was also obviously a little stronger. This guy, Qin Batian, looked at this scene and shook his head. He could actually do such a crazy action. Sure enough, he was like his name, a complete madman. All right, I'm convinced. Qin Feiyang couldn't help but shake his head and smile bitterly. There was really nothing this guy didn't dare to do. Chapter 2902. Sigh. How great would it be if he was really one of us dragons? The woman in white shook her head and sighed. From this child's performance, his future achievements would definitely not be lower than Qin Feiyang's. What did you say? Black dragon, ancestral dragon, glared at her. The woman in white glanced at him and said with a faint smile, I'm just speaking from the bottom of my heart. Black dragon, ancestral dragon snorted and looked up at Madman, killing intent flashing in his eyes. He hated Madman to the bone. This kind of hatred was even more than his hatred for Qin Feiyang. But Madman just had to provoke him and said with a smile, Master, how is it? I didn't embarrass you, right? Looking at Madman's playful attitude, Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon really wanted to go crazy. Crack! At this time, the third heavenly tribulation descended. Quickly kill him! Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon roared in his heart, but it didn't go as he wished. The heavenly tribulation was blocked by the golden barrier again. You can't even kill such an ant. Damn heavens, what use do you have? Seeing this, Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon felt indignant. Boom! Soon, the fourth heavenly tribulation descended. The power of this heavenly tribulation had also reached the initial imperishable realm. It seems that his heavenly tribulation is exactly the same as your heavenly tribulation. Qin Batian whispered. Qin Feiyang nodded. At that time, his fourth heavenly tribulation was also comparable to the initial imperishable realm. And now Madman was the same. Could it be that Madman's heavenly tribulation would also surpass the imperishable realm and reach the Dominator realm? However, facing this heavenly tribulation, Madman's eyes were like torches. Not only was he not afraid, he continued to use the power of thunder and lightning to temper his body. Although each tempering would make him suffer physical pain, he didn't frown, as if he didn't feel pain. The heaven-defying divine art was indeed heaven-defying, helping him block one heavenly tribulation after another. Boom! Suddenly, Madman's body also exploded with a dull sound, and his body soared to the peak level. Ha ha! Madman couldn't help but laugh. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled bitterly. The heavenly tribulation was originally the bane of evil, but now the madman was doing the opposite, using the heavenly tribulation to temper his body. Furthermore, he had successfully tempered his body to the pinnacle level. What else could he say? He could only admire him. As expected, he is not simple. The Prince of Dragons mumbled. Princess Dragon said unhappily, Brother, why are you still praising him? Shouldn't I praise him? The Prince of Dragons asked. He's our enemy. Can you tell which side you're on? Princess Dragons pouted. Enemy, the Prince of the Dragons shook his head and smiled. Why are you shaking your head? Princess Dragons frowned. Little sister, let me tell you something. There are no eternal enemies in this world. And he and Qin Feiyang will sooner or later become members of our dragons. The Prince of Dragons laughed. Become members of our dragons? Princess Dragons was taken aback, then immediately looked at Long Zun and said, Mother, look at Big Brother. He's still talking in his sleep. Long Zun couldn't help but raise her brows. Sleep talking, the Prince of Dragons murmured. He didn't explain further and continued to look at the madman. Not enough. This daddy's body also needs to reach the sovereign level. High up in the sky, the madman raised his head and laughed. Strands of lightning power continued to fuse into his body. Kacha! The fifth heavenly tribulation descended. The power of this heavenly tribulation was stronger than the fourth, the sixth, the seventh, the eighth, the ninth. When the ninth heavenly tribulation descended, the terrifying power could already be described as destroying the world. The madman raised his head and looked at the bloody heavenly tribulation, muttering, It's time to let you see my true strength. As soon as his voice fell, the madman suddenly raised his arm. The golden barrier collapsed and then condensed into a 10-meter-long halberd. As if it was made of gold, golden light illuminated all directions. The madman grabbed the halberd and slashed at the heavenly tribulation. Boom! The heavenly tribulation was annihilated on the spot. The halberd was like a peerless divine weapon, blooming with dazzling light. The madman was like a god, pointing at the sky, overflowing with domineering aura. The 11th, 12th, 15th heavenly tribulation continued to descend. When facing the 20th heavenly tribulation, the madman began to struggle, because the power of the heavenly tribulation had already reached the peak imperishable realm. Boom! Facing the terrifying heavenly tribulation, the madman's situation became worse and worse. Every time a heavenly tribulation descended, he would suffer a fatal injury. When the 23rd heavenly tribulation descended, the halberd in the madman's hand shattered on the spot. The terrifying power of lightning instantly submerged him. Accompanied by a painful howl, the madman's body directly shattered. Not good. Qin Feiyang's expression changed greatly. He remembered that when the 23rd heavenly tribulation descended, his blood sword collapsed, his body shattered, and only his divine soul remained. At that time, if it wasn't for the sunset divine bow and other heaven-defying divine weapons protecting him, he wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Don't help me, the madman shouted. Clang! Accompanied by a loud sound, the blood demon tower rushed out. In an instant, a bloody light overflowed into the sky, protecting the madman. Fortunately, he has the blood demon tower. Qin Feiyang breathed a sigh of relief. Are you sure the blood demon tower alone is enough to protect him? Qin Batian said in a deep voice. One had to know that Qin Feiyang had the help of 18 heaven-defying divine weapons during his tribulation, but in the end he still couldn't withstand it. If he hadn't comprehended the law of lightning at the critical moment, he would have died. Since he said that he doesn't need my help, then I believe that he can definitely do it. Qin Feiyang said. Boom! Another heavenly tribulation descended. The blood demon tower was very decisive. It directly rushed into the Star River with the madman's divine soul, entering a fully recovered state to resist the heavenly tribulation. Qin Batian also chased into the Star River with Qin Feiyang. The people of the dragons didn't follow this time because Qin Feiyang was present. Qin Feiyang wasn't like Qin Batian. Before Qin Batian and the others did anything, they would first consider the consequences of their actions. But Qin Feiyang wouldn't. As long as there was a chance, he would make a move. And after so long, the sunset divine bow and other heaven-defying divine weapons might have been repaired. So once Qin Feiyang made a move against them, the consequences would be unimaginable. Boom! The heavenly tribulation descended crazily. The blood demon tower also entered a state of fragmentation, step by step. The artifact spirit said anxiously, "Madman, I can't hold on for long. Give me a little more time." The madman whispered as he glanced at the heavenly tribulation. His previous frivolous attitude was gone, and he looked incomparably calm. "What is he doing?" Qin Batian was surprised. "I don't know." Qin Feiyang shook his head. Suddenly, the madman actually closed his eyes, and there was no change in his expression. It was as if he wasn't transcending the tribulation, but was on vacation. Has he given up resisting? Qin Batian frowned. Giving up resisting? How is that possible? This isn't Senior Brother Madman's character at all. Qin Feiyang said. Then what is he doing? Qin Batian was suspicious. Qin Feiyang also looked at the madman in confusion. Suddenly, he shuddered and said in surprise, "This guy can't be thinking of fighting to survive, right?" "What do you mean?" Qin Batian looked at him in a daze. "Thunder Law," Qin Feiyang said word by word. What? He also wants to take the opportunity to comprehend the Thunder Law. Qin Batian was stunned. That's what he means. Qin Feiyang nodded. This guy. Qin Batian shook his head speechlessly. Was it so easy to comprehend the power of laws? Wasn't this treating one's life as a joke? You knew him earlier than me, so you should know him better than me. With his talent and comprehension, he might really be able to do it. Qin Feiyang's eyes were filled with anticipation. Qin Batian fell silent. Indeed, he knew the madman very early on, and their relationship back then was quite good, so he knew about the madman's situation. Whether it was the madman's talent or potential, he was one in a million. However, because of his foster father's death back then, he had been depressed. If not for this matter, the madman's achievements would not be lower than his. In other words, as long as the madman was serious, he would definitely be a very terrifying person. Thinking of this, Qin Batian's eyes couldn't help but look forward to it. Crack! Boom! The power of the heavenly tribulation became more and more terrifying. All of a sudden, the power increased to the half-step sovereign realm. The galaxy began to collapse. The situation of the Blood Demon Tower was getting worse and worse. Although it was a heaven-defying divine artifact, although it had entered a state of complete recovery, it was still the only heaven-defying divine artifact. Moreover, it was different from the Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying divine artifacts. The Sunset Divine Bow and other heaven-defying divine artifacts had been cultivating in the land of origin for a long time and had become stronger than before. But the Blood Demon Tower had not entered the land of origin. Its strength was still at the level of an ordinary, heaven-defying divine artifact. Boom! When the power of the heavenly tribulation increased to the initial sovereign realm, the Blood Demon Tower finally couldn't withstand it and shattered into pieces. The dazzling divine light also dimmed. Boom! The heavenly tribulation was like a reaper, heading straight for the madman's divine soul. However, the madman didn't seem to notice and still had his eyes closed. The madman himself wasn't anxious, but Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian, who were bystanders, were about to go crazy. Hurry! Qin Feiyang roared in his heart. Qin Batian said in a deep voice, Feiyang, quickly prepare to rescue him. Qin Feiyang nodded. If it really reached the point of life and death, he wouldn't sit back and do nothing. In the blink of an eye, the heavenly tribulation had already arrived. Qin Feiyang was about to make a move, but at this moment the madman suddenly opened his eyes and two divine lights burst out. Following closely, in front of him, a wisp of blood-colored lightning flame appeared. The aura of the power of laws also spread out. This Qin Feiyang was stunned. Qin Batian also looked at the wisp of lightning flame in shock. He actually did it? This guy is really a monster. Haha, the law of thunder, this is too simple. The madman looked at the lightning flame and couldn't help but laugh proudly. Boom! At the same time, the heavenly tribulation blasted down and drowned the madman. The nemesis of evil power, is it? Absorb for me. The madman's domineering voice sounded in the lightning. Following closely, an earth-shattering scene appeared. The lightning formed by the heavenly tribulation surged into the madman's body like a tide. As for the lightning, it didn't cause any harm to his fleshly body. Chapter 2903. Simple. Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian looked at each other. Fortunately, there was no one else here. Otherwise, if they heard this, they would probably die from anger. But there was nothing they could do. This guy did have the capital to be arrogant. Ancestor. Although he has mastered the law of thunder and is no longer afraid of the heavenly tribulation, the divine power in his body is, after all, evil. Logically speaking, the heavenly tribulation should still have some restraints on him. But now, why does it not have any restraints at all? Qin Feiyang looked at Qin Batian suspiciously. This is the mystery of the law of thunder. When you comprehend the law of thunder, it is equivalent to breaking the shackles and no longer being restrained. In fact, your situation is similar to his. The murderous aura, and evil aura born in the slaughter domain are also not tolerated by heaven and earth. Qin Batian said, "There is still a difference." Qin Feiyang said, "There is definitely a difference, but the logic is the same." Qin Batian smiled. Qin Feiyang nodded. Boom! Next, the heavenly tribulation continued to fall, but it was all absorbed by the madman. The madman's body was also successfully tempered to the supreme level. When the 99th tribulation descended, a ray of auspicious light descended from the sky and merged into the madman's body. The madman's body immediately began to be reconstructed. He also officially stepped into the imperishable realm. At the same time, it also announced the end of the tribulation. Qin Feiyang stepped forward and shook his head helplessly. "You don't want to lose to me at all." "Of course. I have already lost to Qin Batian back then. If I lose to you now, how shameful would it be?" The madman pursed his lips. "Then you should be happy now. The law of thunder, the law of slaughter, plus the law of thunder you obtained in the temple. You have mastered 3 kinds of law of thunder." Qin Feiyang shook his head. The madman smiled and said, "Actually, I have to thank you." "Thank me." Qin Feiyang was stunned. "Yeah, it's because I saw you comprehend the law of lightning with my own eyes and received quite a bit of inspiration. That's why I can comprehend the law of lightning so easily now." Madman nodded. "Even if it's because of Feiyang's revelation, it's still very impressive. After all, there were so many people watching back then. Yet, other than you, no one else managed to comprehend the law of lightning." Qin Batian shook his head. "How can they be the same as me? I'm a genius." Madman smiled proudly. Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian looked at each other helplessly. Would it kill you to keep a low profile? A few days later, Madman's body was reconstructed. Qin Feiyang returned the universe ring to Madman and said with a smile, "Do you want to go to Divine Dragon Island again?" "That's exactly what I was thinking." Madman grinned. Qin Batian frowned. He looked at the two of them and said, "Can't the two of you stop?" "I'm not very cultured. How do you spell the word quiet?" Madman asked in return. Qin Batian was speechless. "Ancestor, don't worry. We know what we're doing." Qin Feiyang smiled and sent Qin Batian to the castle. Then the two of them left the Star River and rushed towards Divine Dragon Island below. A few days later, the dragons had already calmed down. "I'm here again. The madman laughed maniacally, stirring up the calm, divine dragon island again. Are you done? A half-step, undying divine dragon ran out and roared. What can you do to us if we're not done? Madman looked at him provocatively. You! The divine dragon gnashed his teeth in anger. Ancestral dragon appeared and said in a deep voice, I advise you not to provoke us again. Provoke? Madman was stunned and sighed. Master, what are you saying? I'm your disciple. I respect you more than anything. Why would I provoke you? Ancestral dragon roared. If you really respect me, then scram immediately. Every time he heard the word master, he felt a great humiliation. How unpleasant is the word scram? Since we're master and disciple, we should be intimate. Madman said, Scram! Ancestral dragon was furious. Madman shook his head and said, You're making me sad. I'm going to kill you. Ancestral dragon could no longer hold back the monstrous anger in his heart. He charged towards the barrier and Madman. I'm waiting for you to come out. Madman immediately revealed a cold smile. Golden light burst out and the halberd appeared. Old Black, come back. The other ancestral dragons heard the commotion and ran out from their respective clans. Seeing this scene, their expressions changed and they roared. However, it was too late. Madman's eyes flashed with killing intent. He grabbed the halberd and charged towards Ancestral Dragon. You think you can overturn the heavens with a heaven-defying divine artifact? Ancestral Dragon was also blinded by anger. He shook his body and turned into a huge black dragon. This was his main body. So what if I turn back to my main body? Madman's face was full of disdain. The halberd shattered the sky and slashed at the black dragon's huge tail. Clang! Accompanied by dazzling sparks, the dragon's scales shattered on the spot and the huge tail fell. The dragon blood immediately poured out like a waterfall. Roar! The black dragon, Ancestral Dragon, held in pain. Ancestral Dragon's dragon meat is a great tonic if used to make soup. Qin Feiyong chuckled and stepped forward to grab Ancestral Dragon's huge tail and put it into the black tortoise realm. You deserve to die, deserve to die, Ancestral Dragon roared again and again. It's you who deserves to die. In the Nether King's hell, you actually wanted to use me to enter the Fallen Valley. Look at who I am. Do you think I'm someone you can use? Madman's body was filled with hostility. He raised the halberd and charged towards Ancestral Dragon's head. However, at this moment, the power of a divine dragon shot out from the Dragon Palace and blasted towards the heavenly halberd. Boom! Madman was sent flying on the spot. At the same time, Qin Feiyong turned his gaze and looked down at the Dragon Palace. He saw Dragon Sovereign standing above the Dragon Palace, emitting a bone-chilling cold current. Come back! Dragon Sovereign looked at Ancestral Dragon from afar and said coldly. But Ancestral Dragon's face was filled with unwillingness. Dragon Sovereign said expressionlessly, I don't want to say it a second time. Ancestral Dragon's eyes trembled. He looked gloomily at Madman and Qin Feiyong before flying towards the Divine Dragon Island below. If you want to leave, you have to get my permission. Qin Feiyong executed the walk formula, and with a single step the blood sword appeared. Its sharpness swept out in all directions, slashing towards the Ancestral Dragon. You're courting death. Dragon Sovereign enunciated each word as killing intent burst out. Shwa! The next moment, Dragon Sovereign appeared in front of Ancestral Dragon and waved his hand. The void shattered and a space-time black hole appeared. Space-time law, profound divine ability. Qin Feiyong immediately felt a powerful suction force that crazily pulled him into the space-time black hole. Profound divine ability. Can't stop me. Qin Feiyong stared at Dragon Sovereign. Battle intent surged as he slashed at the space-time black hole. Boom! An earth-shattering explosion immediately erupted in the area. The space-time black hole collapsed, but the blood sword in Qin Feiyang's hand was also shattered. A profound divine ability comparable to a heaven-defying divine ability is indeed powerful. Qin Feiyang looked up at Dragon Sovereign. His eyes were as sharp as a blade. Dragon Sovereign's pupils shrank. This kill word technique is already strong enough to be comparable to a profound divine ability? One has to know, this kill word technique wasn't the real kill word technique. The real kill word technique was the slaughter domain. If Qin Feiyang activated the slaughter domain, only a sovereign divine weapon would be able to block it. Hee. Lord Dragon Sovereign's name has always been like thunder to my ears. Madman, who had been sent flying, flew over and stared at Long Zun with a grin. This sovereign doesn't have the energy to waste words with you. If you have the ability, then kill your way into the divine Dragon Island. After Dragon Sovereign finished speaking, he turned around and entered the barrier with Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon, without looking back. Qin Feiyang and Madman looked at each other. Looking at Dragon Sovereign's back, they couldn't help but frown. Looking at this posture, Dragon Sovereign didn't intend to fight them head-on at all. With the Ice Dragon's barrier, they really couldn't force their way in. Inside the barrier, Dragon Sovereign looked at Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon, and said solemnly, "Listen to this sovereign. In the future, without this sovereign's permission, if you dare to leave the barrier again, this sovereign will personally kill you." Yes, Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon's body trembled. He quickly bowed and responded, "Useless thing." Dragon Sovereign snorted coldly and disappeared from the Dragon Palace. Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon looked up at Qin Feiyang and Madman with resentment. He also turned around and disappeared from the clan. Qin Feiyang, looking at them, they planned to hide inside. "What do you think we should do?" Madman frowned. It wasn't easy to lure Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon out of the barrier, but Dragon Sovereign disrupted it. This is really not easy. Qin Feiyang shook his head. Madman's eyes suddenly lit up. "How about we lure Prince Dragons out?" Lure him out? Qin Feiyang was stunned. The Prince of the Dragon Clan is Long Zun's precious treasure. As long as we kill Prince Dragons, Dragon Sovereign will definitely go crazy with anger. At that time, he will naturally bring people out and start a full-scale war with us. Madman smiled slyly. Qin Feiyang laughed involuntarily. He nodded and said, "That's a good idea. However, given the Dragon Clan's prince's personality, if he is unwilling, he will not come out no matter what method you use." "Are you that sure?" Madman was stunned. "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded. "If you don't believe me, you can try." "Let's try." Madman looked at Dragon Palace and shouted, "That dogshit prince! I have already finished my tribulation. Come, let's compete." Qin Feiyang shook his head speechlessly. He really did such a childish thing. He ignored Madman and lowered his head to ponder. Sure enough, it was as Qin Feiyang expected. Prince Dragons wasn't provoked, and Dragon Palace was extremely quiet. "I heard Qin Feiyang say that you are very powerful. Why don't you dare to accept the challenge now?" "Don't be a coward," Madman roared, his voice echoing over the entire divine Dragon Island for a long time. "Preposterous! How dare you humiliate His Highness like this? This bastard, sooner or later, I will pull out his tendons and skin him." Prince Dragons didn't have any reaction, but the other divine dragons were enraged. "Sigh, seems like you are just like that. Prince, I think you are just a good-for-nothing. You can hide in there forever." Madman ridiculed, but no matter how ugly his words were, Prince Dragons didn't reply to him. It was as if he didn't hear anything. Chapter 2904. He's really able to keep his composure. Frenzy rubbed his throat. His throat was hoarse from all the shouting, but he didn't make a sound. I already said it's useless. I don't believe it. Qin Feiyang glanced at him. How would I know that he's such a calm person? Frenzy was helpless. Qin Feiyang said, his mental state is not something you can imagine. Then you have to think of an idea. Don't wait for Long Zun to step into the Dominator realm. Look, it's already so difficult to deal with them now. If Long Zun steps into the Dominator realm, there will definitely be no hope. Frenzy said, not only will there be no hope, but the entire ancient world, including the North region, East Tomb, West Desert, and South Desolate Mountain, will also be plunged into misery and suffering. Qin Feiyang said, it's good that you know. When the time comes, the dragon race will definitely wash the ancient realm with blood. There will be a great shuffle. Frenzy said, however, Long Zun space-time law is only at the 4th stage. We still have a lot of time to prepare. Qin Feiyang said, don't think about this. The sooner we get rid of this old witch, the better. Frenzy said, phew. Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and transmitted his voice, Fire Lotus. Ask that brat if the various heaven-defying artifacts have been restored. Okay. Fire Lotus responded. After a while, she said, it's been restored. Very good. Let them out. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed. Soon. Boom. Accompanied by a terrifying aura, 18 heaven-defying artifacts appeared in unison. Below, the dragons on Divine Dragon Island that had just calmed down fell into an uproar again. He took out all the heaven-defying artifacts. What is he planning to do? Everyone ran out and stared at the 18 heaven-defying artifacts, including the sunset bow. Damn it, there's no end to it. Do you really think that we dragons are easy to bully? The 10 ancestral dragons came out with angry faces. I'm bullying you now, so what? When you bullied us in the past, I didn't see you restrain yourself. Madman sneered. The 10 ancestral dragons had gloomy faces, but the dragon palace didn't have any reaction. The revered dragon, the prince of the dragons, and the princess of the dragons did not appear. The dragon sovereign didn't say anything. Even though the 10 great ancestral dragons were burning with rage, they could only stare helplessly. Feiyang, are you thinking of reviving these heaven-defying divine artifacts and forcefully breaking the barrier? Qin Beishan's voice suddenly sounded in Qin Feiyang's mind. We should at least try. Qin Feiyang thought. Calm down first. Even if you want to do that, you have to let the creatures of the divine prefecture leave first. Qin Batian said. Where are we going? Qin Feiyang asked. Black Tortoise World. Qin Batian said. No, the Black Tortoise World can't hold so many people. Moreover, once these people appear in the Black Tortoise World, they will definitely disrupt the order of the Black Tortoise World. Qin Feiyang decisively rejected. Then other than the Black Tortoise World, where else can they go? Qin Batian frowned. Qin Feiyang pondered for a moment and said, I do have a place in mind, the 4 regions. The 4 regions. Qin Batian remained silent. Now that the dragons are trapped on the Divine Dragon Island, they can't interfere with the entrance of the 4 regions. So we can temporarily transfer the people of the Divine Prefecture to the 4 regions. Qin Feiyang said. That works too. Qin Batian nodded and said, Then come in first. We'll discuss it. All right. Qin Feiyang responded and turned to look at Madman. Madman said, What are you looking at me for? Hurry up and do it. Let's not do it for now. Qin Feiyang shook his head and brought Madman and the various heaven-defying divine artifacts into the Black Tortoise World. And Qin Batian was in front of the ancient castle at this moment. Qin Feiyang stepped in front of Qin Batian and frowned. If we really want to transfer to the 4 regions, I'm afraid it will take a lot of time. Qin Batian said, So I'm going to mobilize all 108 generals. Wait, what do you mean? Madman hurriedly interrupted the two and asked suspiciously, Qin Feiyang said, just in case, we're going to transfer the people of the Divine Prefecture to the 4 regions before the war starts. Transfer all of them to the 4 regions? Madman was astonished. That's a huge project, so we need a lot of manpower. After Qin Feiyang said that, he turned to Qin Batian and said, then I'll leave this matter to the Dragon Slayer Palace. Okay. Qin Batian nodded. Qin Feiyang continued, and the resources of the Divine Prefecture, such as the crystal veins and the soul line, have to be taken away as well. That's a must. If these resources are destroyed, then even if the dragons are destroyed by us, the Divine Prefecture will eventually become a place lacking in essence qi. At that time, no one will be willing to return to the Divine Prefecture. Although the 4 regions are vast, they can't accommodate so many creatures. Qin Batian said. Qin Feiyang said with a smile, then let's do it. Okay. Qin Batian nodded. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and brought Qin Batian to Zhongzhou. 108 generals, assemble quickly. As the sound of Qin Batian's voice faded, 108 figures shot out from all directions. Now, these divine generals were all powerful masters in the phenomenal undead realm. However, even if their cultivation had become stronger, they were still respectful to Qin Batian as usual. After all, not only was Qin Batian powerful, but he also had Qin Feiyang as a powerful backer. That's right. In the past, in everyone's eyes, Qin Batian was Qin Feiyang's backer. But now, with the rise of Qin Feiyang, the position had quietly changed. Now, Qin Feiyang was Qin Batian's backer. I have a task for you. Go out immediately and go to the west, north, south, and east separately. Transfer all the creatures in the Divine Prefecture to the 4 regions. Qin Batian said. Yes, the 108 generals didn't ask why. What they had to do was to carry out the order. Go out. Qin Batian turned to Qin Feiyang and said. Qin Feiyang nodded with a smile. With a wave of his hand, he appeared above the divine Dragon Island with Qin Feiyang and the 108 generals. Aren't they the 108 generals of the dragon-slaying palace? What are they doing here? The dragons were shocked. First, 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts appeared, and now, these 108 generals. What was Qin Feiyang going to do? Don't delay, Qin Feiyang warned as he looked at the 108 generals. Okay, the 108 generals nodded. Qin Batian waved his hand and opened 4 time and space transportation channels. He smiled and said, oh, after completing the task, we will meet at the north coast. Yes, the 108 generals immediately divided into 4 groups and entered the time and space transportation channels. Looking at the backs of the 108 generals, the white-clothed woman's pupils suddenly shrank. She said, look at their cultivation. Have they all reached the greater undead stage? The other ancestral dragons looked, and a trace of disbelief crept up their faces. As expected, these 108 people had already stepped into the great success imperishable stage. It seems that the time array of the Black Tortoise realm is not as simple as we thought. The blood dragon, ancestral dragon, said, the situation is getting worse for us dragons. The white-clothed woman sighed. After the 108 generals left, Qin Feiyang pondered for a while. He looked at Qin Batian and said, Ancestor, I will go to the Holy Dragon City first. Holy Dragon City? Qin Batian was stunned. A trace of a smile crept up his eyes. He said, You are going to see Shangguan Qiu, right? Qin Feiyang said helplessly, Ancestor, can you not smile so strangely? Really? Qin Batian laughed. Even a fool can see it. Qin Feiyang rolled his eyes. Qin Batian shook his head and smiled. He said, I have heard about Shangguan Qiu and your situation. I also specially investigated this girl. She is indeed a good girl. And then, Qin Feiyang said with a dark face. He even secretly investigated Shang Guanqiu. What was he trying to do? Don't be so dull. It is your blessing that such a good girl likes you. Qin Batian said. What about you? Didn't you meet any women you like in the ancient realm? Qin Feiyang said. Me. Qin Batian was stunned. He said, I'm already so old. How can I have the energy to think about this? So you do have this idea, but you are powerless? Ancestor, you are finished. When I return to the Black Tortoise realm, I will tell my great-grandmother. Qin Feiyang said with a sneaky smile. Go away. Qin Batian glared at Qin Feiyang and said, Don't do anything rash. You know your great-grandmother's temper. If she hears this, how can I live in peace in the future? Ha, ancestor. You are also a henpecked husband. Qin Feiyang laughed. What henpecked husband? This is respect. Qin Batian glared at Qin Feiyang. Then you have to suck up to me. Otherwise, one day I will accidentally spill the beans. Qin Feiyang smiled slyly. Brat, are you looking for a beating? Qin Batian's face darkened. How dare you threaten me? You are asking for a beating. Qin Feiyang grinned. Holy Dragon City. With the arrival of the divine generals, the entire Holy Dragon City was in chaos. They want us to move to the northern region? Are you kidding me? The divine land is my home. I would rather die than leave. Me too. I don't want to leave my home. Many people were somewhat resistant to the idea of moving. What do you know? This is for your own good. Our battle with the dragons is about to begin. Do you want to stay here and wait for death? Jiang Dafei stood beside a group of divine generals and said angrily, as the city lord of the Holy Dragon City, it was naturally his duty to move. But we don't have to go to the 4 regions. We can temporarily retreat to the North Sea and come back when the battle is over. That's right. The northern region is so far away from the divine Dragon Island. Even if you revive the heaven-defying divine artifact, you won't be affected. Everyone spoke one after another. What if the battle spreads to the North Sea? Suddenly a cold voice sounded. Then 2 figures appeared. It was Qin Feiyang and Qin Batian. Young lord, Jiang Dafei hurried over and said with a worried face, These people don't want to move. Qin Feiyang, can you understand us? After all, we are all born and raised in the divine land. If you ask us to leave now, isn't it the same as asking us to abandon everything? Seeing Qin Feiyang appear, the people in the city below hurriedly said, I understand the reluctance and pain of leaving your home, but there's no other way now. You have to leave. Otherwise, once the battle spreads to the entire divine land, it will be too late for you to leave. Qin Feiyang said. But everyone wanted to say something. No buts. This decision is for your own good, and I promise you that when the battle with the dragons is over, I will immediately send someone to pick you up. Of course, if you insist on not leaving, then I won't force you. But when the battle starts, don't expect us to care about your life and death. Because by then, I'm afraid we can't even protect ourselves. Think carefully. And those who decide to move, pack up your belongings immediately. After Qin Feiyang finished speaking, he ignored those people and flew toward the treasure pavilion. And students, I also hope you can make progress in your studies. I also want to thank everyone for your support in the past year. Thank you. In addition, I hope everyone can take good care of themselves in the recent pneumonia epidemic, especially the friends in Wuhan. You must take good care of yourselves and your families. Finally, there will be no more updates at night. The time for tomorrow's update will still be 8:00 in the evening. Chapter 2905. In front of the treasure school, Shang Guanqiu stood at the door, looking at the chaotic crowd on the street. Chief Steward, what should we do? A guard next to him looked at Shangguan and asked in a panic, "Why are you panicking?" Shangguan glared at him, then looked up at Qin Feiyang. Whoosh! Qin Feiyang landed in front of Shangguan and smiled at her. "Greetings, young Master Qin." A group of guards and staff members bowed to salute. Qin Feiyang nodded. Shangguan looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "Is it your idea to move?" "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded. Shangguan heart skipped a beat. She said, "So the battle between us and the dragons is really about to break out?" "Yes. I was going to do it, but the ancestors took the creatures of the divine land into consideration. So we discussed and decided to move the creatures of the divine land to the 4 domains first." Qin Feiyang said, "I have to go too?" Shangguan asked. "Of course." Qin Feiyang smiled. But Shangguan furrowed her beautiful brows. "What? Still reluctant to leave the divine land?" Qin Feiyang smiled. "Silly boy, she's not reluctant to leave the divine land. She's reluctant to leave you." Qin Batian stood in the air and looked at Qin Feiyang, who was like a block of wood, and could not help but mumble to himself. Shangguan heard this and looked at Qin Feiyang with a pair of resentful eyes. "What's with that look? I don't think I've bullied you." Qin Feiyang was suspicious. Shangguan could not help but roll her eyes. "What an idiot." She said, "Yes, I'm reluctant to leave the divine land. We've just settled down and now we have to move. It doesn't matter. When the battle is over, you can come back if you want. And by then, you'll be the chief steward of the treasure school." Qin Feiyang smiled. "The chief steward of the treasure school," Shangguan murmured. In fact, what she cared about was not the chief steward of the treasure school at all. She just wanted to stay in Shenzhou and look at this man a few more times. Pack up and return to the northern region first. Come back when everything is over. Qin Feiyang smiled. "All right." Shangguan nodded and plucked up his courage. He looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, "Can I hug you?" "That's not a good idea. Men and women shouldn't touch each other." Qin Feiyang smiled awkwardly. "Can you not be so old-fashioned? Just treat it as a farewell between friends." Shangguan stretched out his hands. Qin Feiyang shook his head and smiled. He raised his arm and pulled Shangguan into his arms. With the beauty in his arms, her fragrance assaulted his nostrils. But even so, he didn't have any improper thoughts in his heart. It wasn't that he didn't understand. He just didn't want this to continue. As for Shangguan they could be friends or confidants, but there was absolutely no romantic relationship between them. Shangguan didn't know what Qin Feiyang was thinking, and she didn't want to know. She just wanted to enjoy the happiness of being hugged by someone she loved. She buried her head deep into Qin Feiyang's chest. She wanted to imprint this moment in the depths of her soul forever. She wanted this moment to be eternal, but she also knew that it was impossible. She whispered, "The battle with the dragons is extremely difficult. You must be careful and try to survive." "Okay." Qin Feiyang nodded. Shangguan raised her head and looked at Qin Feiyang. She smiled and said, "As long as you survive, I won't pester you in the future." "You little girl." Qin Feiyang reached out and rubbed Shangguan head. He couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. But Shangguan was a little disappointed by his love, because she could feel that Qin Feiyang's love for her was not the love of a man for a woman, but the love of a brother for a sister. Maybe this is good. She comforted herself in her heart. Then she decisively left Qin Feiyang's arms and turned to look at the guards and staff of the treasure pavilion. Tell them to get ready to move the treasure pavilions in the major cities of the divine land. And listen to the arrangements of the immortal general of the dragon-slaying temple during the transfer process. With Shangguan order, the entire treasure pavilions of the divine land began to get busy. Seeing that the treasure pavilions were preparing to move, the others didn't dare to hesitate and began to pack their belongings. In the blink of an eye, 2 months passed. Qin Feiyang had been staying in the north the entire time. He personally watched as the cities turned into empty cities. He also saw the reluctance in the eyes of those who left. He knew better than anyone how it felt to leave one's home. He didn't want anyone to leave the divine land, but this was a choice he had to make. The creatures of the divine land must leave. Qin Feiyang released his divine thought, which spread out in all directions. Not only were the cities empty, but there were also no fierce beasts in the mountains outside the cities. He couldn't sense the aura of the spirit vein and crystal vein at all. Now he had nothing to worry about. Whoosh! Another 2 months passed. In the sky above the Holy Dragon City, the 108 generals returned. Is everything arranged? Qin Feiyang asked. Yes, the 108 generals nodded. Qin Feiyang took a deep breath. With a wave of his hand, the 108 generals disappeared and Lunatic appeared. He had been busy for a total of 4 months. For months outside was 120,000 years in the Black Tortoise realm. Lunatic's cultivation had already stabilized, and during this time he had been comprehending the power of law. How's your comprehension of the power of law? Qin Feiyang asked with a smile. You'll know when the time comes. Lunatic smiled mysteriously. Still keeping me in suspense? Qin Feiyang was speechless. Don't be long-winded. Let's go. I've been waiting impatiently for a long time. Lunatic looked at the inland sea, his eyes flashing with a shocking cold light. Qin Feiyang smiled faintly and opened an altar. Inland sea. The Mermaid Emperor was guarding the coast as usual. The broken sword floated in the sky, emitting a dazzling divine light. Whoosh! When Qin Feiyang and Lunatic arrived, the Mermaid Emperor opened his eyes and asked, Is everything arranged? Yes. Qin Feiyang nodded. Phew! The Mermaid Emperor let out a long breath. He stood up and looked in the direction of the divine Dragon Island. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time, Qin Feiyang said. But this is also the most difficult battle. We have to face it, right? The Mermaid Emperor smiled. That's true. Qin Feiyang nodded. Then what's next? The Mermaid Emperor asked. Next, send a message to the Blackwing Emperor and the others. Head to the West Sea, North Sea, East Sea, and South Sea respectively. Anyone who tries to enter the 4 regions will be killed without mercy. Qin Feiyang's body emitted a shocking, murderous aura. He wasn't very worried about other things. The only thing he was worried about was that the dragons would be desperate and send people to the 4 regions to kill the innocent. Then what about here? The Mermaid Emperor frowned. We're here, Qin Feiyang said. All right then. The Mermaid Emperor nodded. Let's go. Qin Feiyang waved his hand and stepped into the inner sea with Lunatic. They walked step by step toward the divine Dragon Island. You must win, the Mermaid Emperor roared. We'll do our best. Qin Feiyang smiled without turning his head. They must win, to be honest. Whether it was Qin Feiyang or Lunatic, they didn't have the confidence. After all, the dragons had a sovereign divine weapon. This was an insurmountable mountain, but they would do their best. For the ancient world, for the billions of living beings, and for themselves, because if the dragons weren't eliminated, they would never have a day of peace. The current divine Dragon Island was unusually quiet. Whether it was the various ancestral dragons or those who relied on the dragons, they were all cultivating with all their might. Boom! Suddenly, 2 auras rolled over. Terrifying, murderous auras covered all directions. It was as if 2 death gods were approaching the divine Dragon Island. And the dragons were alarmed. The patriarchs of the various dragons rushed out from their clans and looked towards the source of the aura. Gradually, 2 figures approached from afar and entered their line of sight. It's Qin Feiyang, Lunatic. What are they doing here again? The patriarchs of the various clans were furious. Every few days, they would come to the divine Dragon Island for a stroll. Did they really think that this was their back garden that they could come and go as they pleased? When had the dragons suffered such a cowardly attitude? In front of them, not to mention coming to the divine Dragon Island, no one even had the guts to enter the inner sea. Do you think it's fun? When Qin Feiyang and Lunatic arrived above the divine Dragon Island, the Black Dragon's patriarch immediately roared, "Play!" Qin Feiyang and Lunatic were stunned. The Black Dragon shouted, "Coming to the divine Dragon Island every few days, I want to ask you, what exactly do you want to do?" The divine Dragon Island is now equivalent to our back garden. We can come and go as we please. What can you do? Lunatic's face was full of disdain. You, the patriarchs of the various clans, glared. Qin Feiyang looked at the Black Dragon's patriarch and said with a smile, "Our grudges are not shallow. I remember when I first came to Divine Land, I was intercepted by you." "So what?" The Black Dragons sneered. "So what? I just want to ask you, do you have the guts to come out and fight with me?" Qin Feiyang said lightly, "Do you think I'm stupid?" The Black Dragons sneered. Lunatic said contemptuously, "If you don't have the guts, just say it. Why are you still looking for excuses?" The Black Dragons gritted his teeth and stared at Lunatic. "Come out and fight with me. I won't use any heaven-defying divine arts or heaven-defying divine artifacts. As long as you can beat me, I'll be at your disposal." Qin Feiyang said lightly, "No heaven-defying divine arts or heaven-defying divine artifacts." The Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon, was stunned. "That's right. I, Qin Feiyang, have always been a man of my words. If I say it, I will definitely do it. If you still don't have the guts to come out, then I really have to look at you dragons in a different light." Qin Feiyang said, "Are you sure?" The Black Dragon, Ancestor Dragon, said solemnly, "I'm sure, and I won't use the 3,000 incarnations, nor will I open the eye of heaven." Qin Feiyang said. The Black Dragon's patriarch was a little tempted. As everyone knew, Qin Feiyang's strongest means were the heaven-defying divine artifacts, the eye of heaven, and the 3,000 incarnations. If he really didn't use these means, then he was equivalent to a poisonous snake without fangs, nothing to worry about at all. "Don't be rash. This is definitely a trap." Seeing this, the other patriarchs hurriedly tried to persuade him. The Black Dragon's patriarch's heart trembled when he heard this. This person was famous for being cunning. If he really ran out, he might immediately use the heaven-defying divine artifact to kill him. "Don't think of me as despicable as you. I'll do what I say. I'm just asking if you dare." After Qin Feiyang finished speaking, he looked at the other patriarchs and said, "You can also come out and fight with me. As long as I lose, you can do whatever you want with me." Chapter 2906. The various patriarchs looked at each other. In the end, no one accepted the challenge. The dignified dragons and the patriarchs of various clans actually have no one to accept the challenge. "You guys really make me look at you in a different light. May I ask, what qualifications do you have to rule the ancient realm?" Qin Feiyang shouted. "Don't be presumptuous." The Black Dragons roared. "Then come out and use your strength to shut me up." Qin Feiyang shouted. When the Black Dragons heard this, they went silent again. In the face of such an unbridled provocation, who wouldn't be angry? It could be said that the patriarchs were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. But the other party was Qin Feiyang. Just hearing the name Qin Feiyang, they couldn't help but shudder, let alone fighting. "All of you, scram back to cultivate." Suddenly, Long Zun's shout resounded in the Dragon Palace. When the patriarchs heard this, their faces immediately changed as they hurriedly flew back to their respective clans. "Haha, I really didn't expect that even Long Zun would be so cowardly. Madman laughed loudly. The golden dragons immediately stopped in the air and said angrily, "Little brat, don't be presumptuous." "Isn't that so?" The dignified #1 expert of the ancient realm, the ruler of the dragons, doesn't even dare to accept our provocation. What a joke! Madman sneered. "Lord Longzun, please allow me to go out and fight with them." The golden dragons was an old man wearing a golden robe. He looked at the dragon palace and roared. "That's right. If we don't let them continue to be so presumptuous, if we don't let them, where will our dignity be?" The other patriarchs also opened their mouths, filled with anger. Dignity? After holing up in the divine Dragon Island for so long, do you think you still have dignity? Your dignity has long been thrown away by you and fed to the dogs. No, dogs don't like to eat it. Madman chuckled. Bastard, bastard. The patriarchs were furious, kneeling in the air. Looking at the dragon palace, they roared, "Lord Longzun, we request to battle!" Dragon Palace was quiet. Longzun hadn't shown herself from beginning to end, so no one knew what she was thinking. Lord Dragon Sovereign, the various clan leaders roared furiously. All right, Longzun's voice finally rang out. Following closely, an invisible force descended, and the patriarchs felt their bodies lighten, and they immediately appeared outside the boundary. "Haha, at least you have some backbone." Madman looked at the 10 people and laughed. The dragons had a total of 10 clans, so the number of clan leaders was the same as the ancestral dragon, 10. "Let's see how long you can be arrogant." The black dragons laughed sinisterly. The golden dragons looked at Qin Feiyang and said, "Didn't we agree not to use heaven-defying divine items? 3,000 incarnations and the Eye of Heaven. Of course." Qin Feiyang nodded. "I'll kill you first." The golden dragon ancestral dragon took a step forward, and his dragon might roared in all directions. Like a flood, he pounced on Qin Feiyang. "Feiyang, the various clan leaders are all at the small success undead stage. You can't be careless." Yi Zhong's voice suddenly rang in Qin Feiyang's mind. Obviously, everyone was inside the black tortoise realm, paying attention to the situation outside. "Small success undead stage," Qin Feiyang murmured. Half-step undead stage and small success undead stage were only 2 small realms apart. Moreover, although his cultivation was not as good as the patriarch of the dragons, one had to know that his physical strength had already reached the sovereign level. Boom! Simple and violent, he directly punched out, and the dragon might of the golden dragons was annihilated on the spot. Following closely, Qin Feiyang took a step forward, landed in front of the golden dragons, and punched out. "You don't even open your divine arts. Who are you looking down on?" The golden dragons roared and fiercely slapped out with his palm. Boom! The fist and palm met in an instant. With a crack, the arm of the golden dragons shattered on the spot, flesh and blood splattering everywhere. This scene stunned the golden dragons. The other 9 patriarchs were also shocked. They knew that this person's physical body was very strong, but they didn't expect it to be strong to this extent. "How long has it been? And you actually forgot that my physical body was tempered by the heavenly tribulation." Qin Feiyang looked at the golden dragons with ridicule. "Of course I remember. But didn't I just reach the pinnacle stage at that time?" The golden dragons shouted. "Pinnacle stage?" Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned, then patted his head and shook his head. "Look at my memory. When he was going through the tribulation above the divine Dragon Island, his physical strength had indeed only reached the pinnacle stage. So, this was something that everyone knew. But what everyone didn't know was that after he went through the tribulation in the Star River, he used the heavenly tribulation to temper his physical body, increasing the strength of his physical body to the sovereign level. Regarding this point, even the dragon sovereign, the ancestral dragons, and the princes didn't know. because at that time they had already left the Star River and returned to the divine Dragon Island. In other words, whether it was him, Frenzy, or the dragons, none of them knew that their physical body had already been upgraded to the sovereign level. Because when Frenzy went to the Star River to go through the tribulation, none of the dragons followed to watch. In that case, the strength of the physical body could also be used as an unexpected trump card. Thinking of this, Qin Feiyang's eyes became playful. Boom! He took another step forward, and a monstrous divine power erupted from under his feet. Heavenly Dragons, 9 steps. Sovereign level divine technique. His speed suddenly skyrocketed. You're not the only one who has a sovereign level auxiliary divine technique. The patriarch of the Golden Dragon race shouted and also used a kind of mysterious footwork. His speed was even faster than Qin Feiyang's. In an instant, he circled behind Qin Feiyang. He raised his other hand and slapped towards Qin Feiyang's back. After all, his cultivation was 2 small realms higher than Qin Feiyang, and the speed of the Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps naturally couldn't keep up with him. But Qin Feiyang didn't panic in the slightest. Just as the palm of the Golden Dragon's was about to hit his back, Qin Feiyang suddenly turned around and directly punched out. The terrifying power was suddenly like a torrent that had opened a gate and fiercely poured out. And this time he went all out and didn't hold back at all. Compared to the previous punch, it was several times stronger. Immediately, accompanied by a scream, the other arm of the Golden Dragon's shattered on the spot, and blood stained the sky. His entire body was sent flying like a meteor. Even his body was covered in cracks from the impact of this power. It can't be. So strong. The 9 people of the Black Dragons looked at this scene, and their faces were full of shock. Seriously injuring the Golden Dragons with one punch. How terrifying was this power? Just this little ability? If it is, then I really look down on you. Qin Feiyang turned to look at the Golden Dragons, and there was a trace of disappointment in his eyes. Roar! The next moment, he took another Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps, and each step was more terrifying than the previous one. When the 9th step was taken, a huge Heavenly Dragon roared out, and with a monstrous power, rushed toward the Golden Dragons. Aren't you too happy too early? You're very strong, but your cultivation is only at the half-step Undying Realm. The Golden Dragons smiled ferociously, and the power of the Divine Dragon suddenly emerged, turning into a huge golden sword, thousands of feet long, across the sky, and exuding a sharp edge that could destroy the world. Heavenly Punishment Sword, kill! The Golden Dragons roared, and the huge golden sword suddenly tore the sky and slashed toward the Heavenly Dragon. Boom! Accompanied by a loud noise, the Heavenly Dragon wailed and immediately shattered in the void. Then, the huge golden sword slashed toward Qin Feiyang, and its aura firmly locked onto Qin Feiyang. The difference in cultivation is indeed a rather troublesome problem. Qin Feiyang whispered. If his cultivation was also at the minor Undying Realm, the Heavenly Dragon summoned by the Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps could compete with the huge golden sword. Because this huge golden sword was also formed by a supreme-level divine art. Unfortunately, the difference in cultivation of 2 minor realms gave him no advantage in terms of divine art. Die. The Golden Dragons smiled ferociously. You want to kill me just like that? You're too naive. Qin Feiyang snorted and stepped to the side, calmly avoiding the huge golden sword. But before he could recover, the huge golden sword turned in the air and continued to attack him. Still can't dodge? Qin Feiyang was slightly stunned, and then a look of understanding appeared on his face. It turned out that the aura of the huge golden sword had been locked onto him. Since he couldn't dodge, then he would face it head-on. Whoosh! He suddenly turned around and grabbed the huge golden sword with his bare hands. No way! Facing a supreme-level divine art with his bare hands. He's crazy. The battle here had already attracted countless dragons and humans to watch. They stood below on Divine Dragon Island and watched this scene and couldn't help but feel shocked. No matter how strong your body is, you can't face a supreme-level divine art head-on. How arrogant! If I didn't have the confidence, would I dare to face a supreme-level divine art head-on with my bare hands? Qin Feiyang shook his head speechlessly. Boom! Suddenly, his aura crazily soared. In just an instant, his cultivation soared to the initial stage of the imperishable realm. That's right, it was the Rising Dragon technique. The Rising Dragon technique could now raise his cultivation by 2 minor realms. In other words, it could also raise his cultivation to the initial stage of the imperishable realm. This was also why he didn't use any heaven-defying divine items, the Eye of Heaven and the 3,000 incarnations to fight with the dragon's patriarch. Before, because of the difference in cultivation, when facing an imperishable realm expert, the power of a divine art would be greatly reduced. For example, when he was still at the 9th heaven realm, when facing an imperishable realm expert, he couldn't unleash the full power of his divine art. But now it was different. Now he was also an imperishable realm expert, so the power of a divine art could be fully unleashed. Boom! In just an instant, his cultivation suddenly rose to the initial stage of the imperishable realm. Then, he grabbed the incoming golden giant sword and clenched his hand. With a loud clang, the golden giant sword shattered on the spot. Poof! The golden giant sword shattered, and ancestral golden dragon spat out a mouthful of blood. But at this moment, the injury was no longer important to him. He stared at Qin Feiyang's back, his eyes full of shock. He actually crushed the golden giant sword formed by a supreme-level divine art with his bare hands? This kind of power and this physical body was too terrifying. The most important thing was that he actually had a divine art that could raise his cultivation. Now, this person was also at the initial stage of the imperishable realm, the same cultivation as him. How could he fight? Chapter 2907. A mere supreme-level divine art is nothing to me. Qin Feiyang waved his big hand fiercely, and the broken golden greatsword was immediately crushed into pieces. Whoosh! Then, he turned around and took a step forward, landing in front of the chief of the Golden Dragons. The chief of the Golden Dragons was stunned and instinctively took a few steps back. With your strength, I don't need to activate my 3,000 incarnations and the Eye of Heaven. Qin Feiyang raised his hand and slapped the chief of the Golden Dragon's head. What are you being so arrogant for? Do you really think I can't kill you? The chief of the Golden Dragons was enraged, and his body emitted a dazzling golden light. Roar! In the next moment, a 5-clawed golden dragon that was thousands of feet long appeared, and the dragon's power surged and shook the world. You finally showed your true body, Qin Feiyang muttered, but his hand didn't stop and continued to slap the chief of the Golden Dragons. I'll send you to hell. The golden dragon roared and raised his giant tail to slap Qin Feiyang's arm. Boom! The two collided in an instant. How could Qin Feiyang's bull-sized hand be compared to the golden dragon's huge tail? When the two of them were together, one was like an ant while the other was like an elephant. However, it wasn't a competition of size but strength. When Qin Feiyang's palm strike landed, the dragon scales on the golden dragon race's clan head's huge tail shattered with a ka-cha sound. Dragon blood fell like rain and dyed the sky red. The golden dragon chief howled in pain. He opened his mouth and spat out a beam of dragon breath that contained shocking destructive power. However, Qin Feiyang easily dodged the dragon breath with a single teleport. Then he threw another punch at the golden dragon patriarch. Roar! With another miserable howl, the enormous body of the golden dragon clan's clan chief was sent flying like a meteorite. He can't fight back at all. The chief of the Black Dragons and the other 8 were shocked to the extreme when they saw the scene. He was so powerful even if he didn't activate his 3,000 incarnations and the Eye of Heaven. Send me to my death? Qin Feiyang smiled coldly and said, Now I'm the one sending you to hell. Heavenly Dragon's 9 steps was executed once again. Ding! A heavenly dragon roared out, carrying with it a world-destroying divine might. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it pounced towards the golden dragon. Scram! The golden dragons roared. As the power of the divine dragon emerged, the giant golden sword appeared again and slashed at the sky dragon. But today was different from the past. Right now, Qin Feiyang's cultivation was also at the 9th heaven realm. With a loud clang, the heavenly dragon and the giant sword collided and exploded at the same time, giving birth to a terrifying chi wave that swept in all directions. The void within a radius of several million miles collapsed and shattered madly, as if doomsday had arrived. The 9 members of the Black Dragons and Madman couldn't help but retreat. This fellow is indeed a formidable opponent. The madman looked at Qin Feiyang, his eyes burning with fighting spirit. If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a formidable enemy, he would have immediately taken action and had a one-on-one battle with Qin Feiyang. Boom! Suddenly, an even more terrifying dragon aura erupted. Madman looked up and saw a giant dragon shadow rushing out from behind the golden dragons. It was the dragon shadow of an ancestral dragon. The mark of the ancestral dragon between its eyebrows was like a burning flame, appearing extremely dazzling. This was the battle soul of the golden dragons. Innate ability, ancestral dragon domain. The golden dragons roared. Ding! The dragon shadow immediately roared into the sky, and golden light fell down. In the blink of an eye, a huge golden domain appeared, covering thousands of miles in the sky. Qin Feiyang was also enveloped in the domain. At this moment, he felt a great sense of oppression sweeping over. It was as if his entire body was stuck in a quagmire, unable to move an inch. I'm not even afraid of the ancestral dragon, let alone a mere battle soul. Qin Feiyang smiled contemptuously. Clang! As his voice fell, sword shadows rushed into the sky. A total of 99 sword shadows. That's right. After breaking through to the imperishable stage, the number of Guiyuan sword technique had also increased. In the past, there were 90, but now there were 99. However, Qin Feiyang was a little puzzled. Logically speaking, shouldn't there be 100 sword shadows? Because in the past, every time he broke through a realm, there would be 10 more sword shadows. But why was there only 9 more now? 99 sword shadows. Could it be that this was the limit of Guiyuan sword technique? But now was obviously not the time to study this problem. 9 returned to 1. Qin Feiyang shouted in a low voice. Clang! The 99 sword shadows suddenly merged together and turned into a huge sword shadow, slashing towards the ancestral dragon domain with the power to destroy the world. Crack! Accompanied by an ear-piercing crisp sound, the ancestral dragon domain suddenly shattered. One had to know. In the past, when there were only 90 sword shadows, 9 returned to 1 was enough to destroy the world. Not to mention now that there were 99 sword shadows. Although there were only 9 more, the power was already worlds apart from before. Boom! After the ancestral dragon domain shattered, the sword shadow was like a hot knife through butter, directly slashing towards the head of the golden dragons. No! Looking at the oncoming sword shadow, the golden dragons couldn't help but roar in despair. His heart was shrouded in an aura of death. Hurry and help. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, the black dragons hurriedly shouted and rushed towards the golden dragons. The other 8 patriarchs also rushed to rescue him. Since it's a challenge, then it must be fair. What's the point of bullying with numbers? Also, do you think I don't exist? At this moment, Madman's voice sounded. A monstrous, baleful aura suddenly roared in this world. The black dragons and the others were shocked and looked towards Madman. They saw that Madman's eyes were blood red and his evil aura was monstrous. He was like a demon god, making one's heart palpitate. Ah! Just as they were distracted, the sword shadow fell mercilessly, accompanied by a shrill scream. The huge body of the golden dragons was directly slashed into two. Dragon blood suddenly poured down like a waterfall, dyeing the sky red. Damn it! The black dragons heard the scream and turned his head to look at the bloody scene. He immediately gnashed his teeth and roared like thunder. Qin Feiyang glanced at them indifferently. The sword shadow once again descended, and the sharpness of the sword could topple mountains and overturn seas. Boom! Not only was the Golden Dragon Patriarch's physical body destroyed, but even his divine soul was annihilated by the sword. Qin Batian, I will not let you go. The next moment, an angry roar sounded in the holy land of Divine Dragon Island. This was the voice of the Golden Dragons. Obviously, he had left his soul in the Holy Land. In other words, even if he killed the Golden Dragons now, he could be resurrected again. Really troublesome. Madman frowned. It's not troublesome. Anyway, the battle has already begun. When we break the barrier, the first thing we will do is to destroy that wisp of his soul. Moreover, now that only a wisp of his soul is left, he has already lost his combat strength. We will also have one less strong opponent for the time being. Qin Feiyang said, although they couldn't completely kill the Golden Dragons, it was also beneficial for them. After all, the Golden Dragons were at the initial imperishable stage, and their combat strength couldn't be ignored. And now, only a wisp of his soul was left. Although it wasn't that he didn't have any combat strength, but the combat strength of this wisp of soul was no longer a threat to them. In short, the Golden Dragons were no longer of any use in the battle at the back. Now it's your turn! Qin Feiyang's gaze turned and landed on the 9 people of the Black Dragons, saying, Why don't you all just come together, so as not to waste time? The 9 people immediately stared at Qin Feiyang, their eyes gloomy and frightening. Qin Feiyang directly ignored them and looked at Madman, saying, Senior brother, don't stop them. A bunch of trash, there's no need. Ha! Madman laughed and said, You don't say. The word trash is quite suitable for them. You've gone too far. Hearing the conversation between the two, the 9 people of the Black Dragons immediately roared and revealed their true forms, attacking Qin Feiyang. The 9 divine dragons were Black Dragon, White Dragon, Blood Dragon, Sword Dragon, Wood Dragon, Water Dragon, Earth Dragon, Fire Dragon, and Silver Dragon. Their bodies were thousands of feet long, covered in dense scales, like majestic mountain ridges, and overflowing with ferocious aura. Qin Feiyang, this is all dragon meat. Don't waste it. Leave it to benefit the people of the Black Tortoise world. Madman roared. That's what I was thinking. Qin Feiyang grinned. Roar. Accompanied by a loud dragon roar, the purple-gold dragon soul appeared. Emperor Domain, open. With Qin Feiyang's roar, the Emperor Domain immediately shrouded the surroundings. The 9 patriarchs paused in midair, their minds completely blank. Qin Feiyang glanced at the 9 patriarchs and muttered in a low voice, Soul destruction technique. Boom! An invisible wave suddenly rolled out in all directions with Qin Feiyang as the center. In just an instant, the 9 patriarchs were drowned by the wave. Roar! Ah! Accompanied by a series of screams, the divine souls of the 9 patriarchs were directly erased by the soul destruction technique. They died just like that. At this moment, the entire Divine Dragon Island fell into a dead silence. Whether it was the dragons or the humans who followed the dragons, such as Li Xiaofei, they all stared at the corpses of the 10 patriarchs with their mouths agape. These were the patriarchs of the various clans. Not only did they have extremely pure dragon's bloodline, but they also had the cultivation of the initial imperishable stage. Any one of these divine dragons was an existence that could sweep across the 8 desolates and make people tremble in fear, not to mention when they joined forces. But at this moment, they were actually killed by Qin Feiyang just like that? Gasp! Many people sucked in a breath of air. What sort of freak was this Qin Feiyang? Once he stepped into the imperishable stage, it was as if he had changed into another person, so powerful that it made people despair. The 10 ancestor dragons were also watching. Seeing the 10 patriarchs killed in seconds, their hearts could not calm down for a long time. Because the 10 patriarchs were their descendants, they knew their strength very well. Not to mention others, just the divine generals of the Dragon Slayer Palace. These divine generals were all extremely powerful. But even so, these divine generals could not defeat them. But Qin Feiyang had killed them in seconds. What a terrifying human. The point was he was still so young. If he already had such terrifying means at such a young age, what would happen in the future? Lord Dragon Supreme was right. The biggest threat to the dragons was indeed this man. Compared to this man, people like Qin Batian, Lu Zhengyang, Supreme Cloud, Supreme Beast, and Yi Zhong were not worth mentioning. Chapter 2908. Damn it, damn it! Qin Feiyang, just you wait, we won't let you go. The roars of the various patriarchs also resounded in the sacred mountain. Who were they? He was an expert at the small success imperishable realm, and he was also the patriarch of the dragon race. He had a pure bloodline, but now they were killed by a human. This was a great humiliation for them, a stain that would last their lives. Childish. Qin Feiyang shook his head and sent the 9 patriarchs' divine dragon bodies into the black tortoise world. Obviously, these patriarchs also left their divine souls in the dragon's sacred ground. However, this kind of ruthless behavior really made people look down on them. A loss was a loss. Why did they have to shout a few words? Childish behavior. Madman walked to Qin Feiyang's side and looked down at the divine dragon island, shouting, "Hey, hey, hey! Is this all you dragons can do?" The dragons glared at each other. Madman joked, "What's the use of just staring at me? Come out if you have the guts." "Young man, don't push your luck. Let people off when possible." A hoarse voice sounded. Madman was taken aback and looked towards the source of the voice, only to see a white-haired old man standing on a mountain peak. "Wang Chong," Qin Feiyang whispered. "Wang Chong?" Madman was suspicious. "He's a god-level alchemist and a supreme expert in the great success imperishable stage," Qin Feiyang said. "So powerful?" Madman was surprised. His dragons should be on the same level as Master and Sovereign Beast. Qin Feiyang nodded. "Interesting." The corner of Madman's mouth lifted slightly. Looking down at Wang Chong, he shouted, "Old man, don't you feel ashamed at all?" "What do you mean?" Hearing this, Wang Chang's old eyes couldn't help but be suspicious. "You don't even understand? It seems that you are even more stupid than I thought." Madman mocked. Wang Chong could not help but frown. Madman asked, "What do you think of me and Qin Feiyang?" Young and promising, smart and capable. Wang Chong glanced at Qin Feiyang and the lunatic and commented, "That's right. We're so young, yet we know how to benefit the people. Why don't you know? As a god-level alchemist and a supreme expert in the great success undead stage, instead of benefiting the common people, you are aiding the evildoers. Don't you think it's embarrassing?" Madman scolded mercilessly. Wang Chong nodded in realization. He was not angry and said indifferently, "Everyone has their own ambitions. There's no need to force yourself. Everyone has their own ambitions. It's a pity that our paths are different and we cannot work together." Now I'm going to challenge you. Do you dare?" Madman looked down from above with an overbearing attitude. Wang Chang shook his head and said, "This kind of meaningless battle, this old man doesn't like it. After talking for so long, you still don't dare." So what if he's a great success undead stage expert and a supreme expert in the great perfection undead stage? Aren't they all like cowards, hiding in divine Dragon Island and not daring to come out? Madman laughed loudly. Arrogant, and unruly laughter echoed over the entire divine Dragon Island and did not dissipate for a long time. This was not only provoking Wang Chang, but also provoking Long Zun. Because Long Zun was one of the dragons, the only great perfection undead stage expert in the entire ancient world. Inside the dragon palace, Princess Dragon said angrily, "Mother, this lunatic is going too far." "Ignore him." Next to her, Long Zun waved her hand, but her tone was somewhat gloomy. Obviously, she was also very angry in her heart, but she knew that this was a trap set by Madman and Qin Feiyang to deliberately provoke her. So at this time she had to endure. It was quite rare to make the dignified Long Zun endure to this extent. After all, Long Zun was the ruler of the ancient world. Thinking back to countless years ago, who dared to be presumptuous in front of her. But now, she was blocked by two brats at her door. But she could only endure. This kind of grievance, this kind of humiliation, was enough to make anyone go crazy. "It seems that you are determined to hide." Madman's voice sounded again. Boom! Following closely, a terrifying and monstrous aura suddenly burst out. "This is a heaven-defying divine artifact." Princess Dragon suddenly stood up and said angrily, "What do they want to do?" Long Zun said indifferently, "No matter what they want to do, they can't break the barrier set up by your father." Outside, Madman had indeed taken out the Blood Demon Tower. During this period of time, the Blood Demon Tower had been repaired and emitted a shocking aura. "I don't believe that this barrier is made of iron. Revive for me." Madman roared. Clang! The Blood Demon Tower immediately began to revive, and its aura became more and more shocking. "You revived the heaven-defying divine artifact. Aren't you afraid of hurting the creatures in the west, south, east, and north?" Someone from the dragons roared. Madman smiled mockingly and did not answer. The Blood Demon Tower crazily revived. Boom! Soon, the void and sky here began to collapse. The inland sea that had long dried up was also constantly trembling and sinking. Crazy, this is really crazy. The dragons couldn't help but panic. Although during this period of time, Qin Feiyang had repeatedly come to Divine Dragon Island to use the heaven-defying divine artifact, he had never fully recovered, because he was worried that it would affect the creatures in the east, west, north, and south. But now, Madman was actually fully recovering without caring about the price. They weren't Long Zun. Long Zun understood Ice Dragon, so he was full of confidence in this barrier. But they didn't understand Ice Dragon. Although this barrier was very strong and had always been protecting Divine Dragon Island, the heaven-defying divine artifact was also very terrifying after fully recovering. So now they couldn't help but worry. Even the 10 great ancestral dragons were worried at this moment. Ice Dragon had always been a mysterious existence among dragons. After all, even they, the ancestral dragons, rarely saw Ice Dragon. Clang! Boom! The Blood Demon Tower had already recovered to its peak state. A terrifying destructive aura surged in all directions like a tide. At this moment, the entire inland sea had fallen into a doomsday scene. Wherever the airwaves went, everything was destroyed. Finally, this destructive air wave surged out from the inland sea and entered the east, west, south, and north. Crack! Boom! At this moment, the scene of mountains collapsing and the earth cracking appeared in these 4 places. This was a disaster. The mountains, like Dragon God, were instantly razed to the ground. Abyssal cracks appeared and spread in all directions. But this was only the beginning. Soon, this disaster spread to Holy Dragon City. The glorious and majestic Holy Dragon City was reduced to ashes in an instant. This was the power of a heaven-defying divine artifact, fully recovered. If they hadn't moved in advance, who knew how many creatures would have died tragically? As for the Mermaid Emperor, Sword Emperor, Black-Winged Emperor, and White-Winged Emperor, they had already left the inland sea and headed to the North Sea, East Sea, West Sea, and South Sea, respectively, to guard the final pass. Wang Chong looked at the Blood Demon Tower that had entered a fully recovered state and shouted, "You really don't care about the creatures in the Divine Land." "If you don't care, why should we care?" Madman sneered. With a wave of his hand, the Blood Demon Tower immediately blasted toward Divine Dragon Island with the power to destroy the world. Buzz! A terrifying aura overwhelmed the mountains and overturned the seas. The barrier set up by Ice Dragon appeared in the void. Boom! It was also at this moment. The Blood Demon Tower blasted on the barrier and immediately created a wave of destructive air. The barrier immediately trembled. The dragons and humans of Divine Dragon Island couldn't help but stare nervously at the barrier. However, as time went by, the barrier showed no signs of breaking. Not even a full recovery. Madman raised his eyebrows. "Actually, it's all expected," Qin Feiyong said. "What kind of strength did Ice Dragon have? He could even crush a heaven-defying divine artifact. How could a heaven-defying divine artifact shake the barrier he set up? Haha, so what if it's a heaven-defying divine artifact? If you have the ability, blast open Sir Dragon God's barrier." "Two ants also want to shake us dragons. You really overestimate yourselves. Get lost. Don't embarrass yourself here." Seeing how powerful the enchantment barrier was, the dragon tribe finally relaxed and began to provoke it. Madman glanced at those people and suddenly turned his head to look at Qin Feiyong. Qin Feiyong understood, and with a thought, 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts, including the sunset bow, appeared. Clang! Boom! 18 heaven-defying divine artifacts appeared. What a spectacular scene it was! Divine Dragon Island instantly quieted down. One heaven-defying divine artifact couldn't break the barrier, then what about 18? No, including the Blood Demon Tower. That would be 19 heaven-defying divine artifacts. Would this barrier be able to withstand it? Everyone couldn't help but be on tenterhooks. One heaven-defying divine artifact and 19 heaven-defying divine artifacts were two completely different concepts. "Recover," Qin Feiyong said. Boom! Except for Snowflake and Bloodblade, all the heaven-defying divine artifacts were unsealed and began to recover. Without a doubt, the current scene was even more terrifying. Waves of destructive air waves crazily surged in all directions. Not only Holy Dragon City, but even Snow Dragon City and Horn Dragon City, which were further away, were also destroyed. Not to mention the south, west, and east. Let's talk about the north. Almost half of the north had been destroyed. Mountains collapsed, heaven and earth shook, and wild winds swept in all directions. This was not like the end of the world, it was the end of the world. At this moment, the Divine Land had fallen into an unprecedented disaster. Earthquakes, magma, and tsunamis could be seen everywhere. Fortunately, the creatures and resources of the Divine Land had been transferred to the 4 major regions in advance. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, at that time, there were some people and beasts who were very stubborn and didn't move with everyone, choosing to stay in the Divine Land. At this moment, what they faced was despair. For example, in the northern region, there was a city far away from the inland sea, and there were few humans in it. They stayed in the Divine Land with the mentality of being lucky. They thought that this place was so far away from the inland sea that it shouldn't be affected. They even mocked those who moved, saying that they were making a mountain out of a molehill. However, they seriously underestimated the power of the heaven-defying divine artifacts. Who can save us? When the destructive airwaves roared, they immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. They also realized how naive and ridiculous their idea was. They hadn't even seen a heaven-defying divine artifact before, so they tried to guess the power of the heaven-defying divine artifact. Weren't they digging their own graves? Unfortunately, it was too late to regret it now, because now no one would care about them. Heaven and earth didn't respond, and in the end, they all died under the airwaves. Chapter 2909. In the sky above Divine Dragon Island, other than Snowflake and Bloodblade, Sunset Divine Bow, and the other 16 heaven-defying artifacts had all entered a fully awakened state. The sky here dimmed. The storm was roaring wantonly. The airwaves were rolling crazily, including Blood Demon Tower. That's 17 heaven-defying artifacts. With all 17 heaven-defying artifacts awakening, can the barrier set up by Dragon God withstand it? These two bastards, are they really going to force us dragons into a dead end? All the divine dragons and humans on the island were uneasy at this moment. Even the ancestral dragons were so nervous that they broke out in cold sweat. Kill! Suddenly, Qin Feiyang and Frenzy roared at the same time. Sunset Divine Bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts instantly carried the power to destroy the world as they blasted towards the barrier. Although Snowflake and Bloodblade had not fully awakened, they still exerted their greatest power and blasted towards the barrier. Rumble! The 19 heaven-defying artifacts slammed onto the barrier. The barrier immediately trembled violently. The center of the explosion was even more distorted. Hold on! You must hold on! The people of the Dragon Clan all stared fixedly at the barrier, shouting in their hearts. Break! Qin Feiyang and Frenzy were also roaring. However, although the barrier was constantly twisting and trembling, there were no signs of it breaking. Even with all 17 heaven-defying artifacts awakening, it still can't break? Qin Feiyang and Frenzy's expression gradually turned sluggish. This was too strong. One must know. Sunset Divine Bow and the other heaven-defying artifacts had cultivated in the land of origin for many years and had now reached the initial Dominator realm. Even so, they still couldn't break the barrier set up by Ice Dragon? What cultivation level was this Ice Dragon at? Initial Dominator realm? Greater Dominator realm? Perfect Dominator realm? Or even Perfect Dominator realm? Haha! Lord Dragon God is indeed mighty. Are you feeling powerless now? Desperate? Among the 19 heaven-defying artifacts, 17 of them have been unsealed and awakened, but they still can't break the barrier set up by Dragon God. You can't even break the barrier, yet you want to destroy us dragons? Dream on. Go back and rest. The majesty of the Dragon God is not something you ants can offend. The dragons began to clamor again. This time they were completely at ease. No matter how heaven-defying Qin Feiyang and the madman were, they couldn't break this barrier. This barrier was an indestructible fortress, not even a deity descending from the heavens. I don't believe it. Fight to the death for me. Madman roared. However, the Blood Demon Tower, Sunset Divine Bow, and other heaven-defying divine artifacts all stopped. What are you doing? The madman glared at them. I know you are very angry, but this is also the truth. With our strength, we are unable to break this barrier. The artifact spirit of the Sunset Divine Bow said. Madman roared. Then how can we break it? Sovereign weapon. If we also had a sovereign weapon, we would definitely be able to break through. Sunset Divine Bow said. Madman fell silent. Sovereign weapon? How could they possibly have a divine artifact of this level? If they really had one, it wouldn't be so difficult. We dragons do have a sovereign weapon. Do you want us to lend it to you? If you kneel down and beg us, we might really agree." The various ancestral dragons joked. Madman lowered his head and looked gloomily. Qin Feiyong couldn't help but frown. "You can't even break the barrier of the dragon god, and you still want to fight us dragons? Don't forget, we have a sovereign weapon. Even if you break the barrier, you will only die. So hurry up and get lost. Don't be an eyesore here." The various ancestral dragons sneered. "Since we will only die if we break the barrier, why don't you remove this barrier? Wouldn't it be easier to kill us? In the end, even if you have a sovereign weapon, you don't have the confidence to kill us." Madman's face was full of ridicule. The various ancestral dragons' faces suddenly became gloomy. Indeed, the last time they used the sovereign weapon, they couldn't stop Qin Feiyong. So facing Qin Feiyong now, they didn't dare to be careless. The most important thing was, this sovereign weapon, Long Zun and them couldn't control it. This meant that there were many variables. What? Make you speechless? Since you don't have the ability, then don't talk big. We can't break the barrier, but at least we didn't hide in Divine Dragon Island like a turtle. Don't tell me that you think that holing up in the Divine Dragon Island is something that brings honor to your ancestors? Madman sneered. As soon as these words came out, the dragons were furious to the extreme. What's even more ridiculous is that you dragons have so many supreme powerhouses, but no one dares to come out and fight. I think you should stop calling yourselves dragons in the future. Call yourselves tortoises. Haha, Madman laughed loudly. You're courting death. The various ancestral dragons were furious as they charged towards Madman. However, when they arrived in front of the barrier, they stopped and didn't dare to step out of the barrier. I am courting death, come on. Madman clamored and stepped in front of the various ancestral dragons. There was a barrier between them. The 10 ancestral dragons clenched their fists. Their eyes were extremely gloomy. Don't stare. Let's do something practical. I'm standing here. If you have the guts to come out, I'll beat all of you. There's no need for Qin Feiyong to make a move. Madman said. The 10 ancestral dragons were so angry that their teeth were chattering. You don't even dare. Madman sneered and glanced at Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon. Master, have you forgotten how I beat you up in Fallen Valley? Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon suddenly erupted with a terrifying aura. Don't be impulsive. The woman in white quickly grabbed Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon. You are an Ancestral Dragon. I humiliated you like this, and you can endure it? Come, come, come. This is a rare opportunity. Quickly come and teach me a lesson. Madman looked at Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon with ridicule. Fire Dragon, Ancestral Dragon said in a deep voice, Old Black, he is deliberately provoking you. Don't be fooled. Yes, I am deliberately provoking him, so what? And you old things, don't you usually act like I'm invincible? What? Now all of you are like rats. Where's your prestige? Where's your arrogance? Come out and kill me. Ha, no guts. How lowly. The dragon's face has been lost by you. Madman laughed wildly. Little bastard, go and die. Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon couldn't endure it anymore. Even the woman in white couldn't hold him back. He rushed out of the barrier and threw a punch at Madman. Oh no, the woman in white and the other's eyelids twitched. I'm waiting for you to come out. Madman smiled sinisterly, opened the blood demon domain, and threw a punch at Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon's head. The blood demon domain could make a person's cultivation drop by 5 small realms, and Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon's cultivation was at the greater success imperishable stage. If it dropped by 5 small realms, one could imagine what kind of situation Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon would be in. Come back. The Fire Dragon, Ancestral Dragon shouted. Black Dragon, Ancestral Dragon also recovered his senses and hurriedly retreated back into the barrier. Since you came out, Don't even think about going back." Madman grinned sinisterly. His feet took a mysterious step and instantly rushed behind Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and threw a punch at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's back. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon let out a miserable howl, and his entire body flew forward like a meteorite. This time it was impossible for him to return to the barrier. Only a dragon tail was left last time. "It's not enough for us to make soup." Qin Feiyang chuckled. The soul-extinguishing technique emerged and transformed into a formless, huge wave. It rushed towards the Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon from all directions. Boom! But Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's divine soul wasn't erased. And Qin Feiyang was surprised. "You're not the only one who has a divine artifact to protect the divine soul." The Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon sneered and left without looking back. "So what? As long as you come out, it's a dead end. Kill him." Qin Feiyang roared, and the Sunset Divine Bow and other divine artifacts immediately attacked Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon. "No!" Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon roared. One must know that these divine artifacts were all in a state of recovery. With his strength, how could he block the attack of so many divine artifacts? But just as he was in despair, a space crack suddenly appeared in the void beside him. Following that, a figure walked out from the crack. It was Long Zun. After Long Zun appeared, he grabbed Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and returned to the space crack. The next moment, the two of them appeared inside the barrier. "Damn you! Can't you have some backbone and fight with us head-on? Always hiding, is there any point in it?" Seeing the meat in his mouth fly away just like that, Madman was so angry that he cursed. Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon looked at Long Zun with a face full of fear and said respectfully, "Thank you, Lord." Long Zun looked at Madman and Qin Feiyang, and then looked at Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon and said, "What did I say last time?" Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's body trembled. Last time, Long Zun personally said that no one was allowed to leave the barrier. "You can't remember my words, right?" the revered dragon said. His calm tone contained a shocking fury. "I'm sorry." Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon quickly lowered his head. Slap! Long Zun immediately slapped Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon's face, causing blood to flow. Even so, Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon didn't dare to make a sound. He lowered his head and silently endured it. Only this time, Long Zun said, "Yes." Black Dragon Ancestral Dragon nodded. Long Zun then looked at Madman and Qin Feiyang and said, "From now on, no one will leave this barrier, so please put away your little tricks and don't waste your energy." "Is it fun for you to do this?" Qin Feiyang frowned. "Of course it's fun. Looking at your helpless faces against the barrier is also a kind of enjoyment." Long Zun nodded. "The dignified Long Zun only has this much courage? I really overestimated you." Qin Feiyang shook his head. "I really underestimated you. Your black tortoise boundaries time array shouldn't be that simple." Long Zun said. "Yes." Qin Feiyang nodded. Long Zun's heart trembled, and he asked, "How many years is a day?" "Why should I tell you?" Qin Feiyang asked. Chapter 2910. That's true. How can you reveal such important information to the enemy? But I advise you, instead of wasting time here, you might as well go to the Black Tortoise world and cultivate hard. This way, when I step into the Dominator realm, you might still have a glimmer of hope. Long Zun smiled coldly and turned to leave. Qin Feiyang looked at Long Zun's back, his eyes flickering. The ancestral dragons looked at Qin Feiyang gloomily and also turned to leave. Whoosh! Qin Feiyang took a deep breath and looked at Long Zun with a smile. "Believe me, you don't have time to step into the Dominator realm." Hmm. Long Zun paused and turned to look at Qin Feiyang suspiciously. The ancestral dragons were the same. With such confidence, could it be that this kid already had a way to break the barrier? Qin Feiyang didn't say anything else. He looked up at the sunset divine bow and other heaven-defying artifacts and said, "Guard this place well. Before I come out, no one is allowed to leave Divine Dragon Island." "Don't worry." The sunset divine bow's artifact, Spirit shouted. Whoosh! The next moment, Qin Feiyang disappeared without a trace. Lord Long Zun, the ancestral dragons flew to Long Zun's side, their faces full of surprise. Long Zun stared at the void where Qin Feiyang disappeared and spat out 2 words. "Slaughter domain. Slaughter domain." Heard of it. The ancestral dragon's eyes suddenly trembled. Is he going to activate the slaughter domain now? Frenzy also muttered. The slaughter domain was Qin Feiyang's strongest trump card. It could be said that no one in the current ancient world could survive under the slaughter domain. Originally, such a trump card should be left for last. After all, the slaughter domain could only last for an hour. It could only be activated once a day. If it was activated now, what would they do when facing the Dominator divine weapon? But at present, it seemed that only the slaughter domain had a chance of breaking the barrier set up by the ice dragon. Lord, I remember that Qin Feiyang also activated the slaughter domain last time, but at that time he didn't break the Dominator divine realm. As for the Sovereign's divine realm and the Dragon God's barrier, they are almost on par. In other words, even if he activates the slaughter domain, he won't be able to break the barrier, right? The white-robed woman asked with a flustered expression. Towards the slaughter domain, no matter who it was, there was an instinctive fear. Long Zun remained silent. Ancestral Dragon Black Dragon suddenly said, "I believe that even if he activates the slaughter domain, he won't be able to break the barrier." Why? Long Zun and the other ancestral dragons looked at him. Do you all remember that he absorbed the blood of almost all the sea beasts in the inner sea? Even so, the power of the slaughter domain was unable to break through the Sovereign's divine domain. And now he doesn't have anywhere to find so much blood. So we don't have to worry at all. We'll talk about it later. Whether or not the power of the slaughter domain can reach this level is still unknown. Ancestral Dragon Black Dragon said, "That makes sense. Perhaps his slaughter domain isn't even at the level of a sovereign weapon." The Blood Dragon, Ancestor Dragon, said in a deep voice, "What if he can reach this level with enough blood?" The white-robed woman asked. "Impossible. How can there be such a heaven-defying technique in this world?" Ancestral Dragon Black Dragon shook his head, unwilling to believe it, even if he was beaten to death. "It's useless to discuss this now. Let's just wait and see." Long Zun finally spoke. The other ancestral dragons nodded. Now they didn't dare to leave. This matter had to be taken seriously, because the slaughter domain was an existence that couldn't be ignored. At the same time, Black Tortoise Realm, Western Region, the Sea of Blood was endless. Along with the strong wind, it swept over with monstrous waves of blood. The joy that was originally filled with vitality had now become a life-forbidden zone. Swish! A figure suddenly descended above the sea of blood. It was Qin Feiyang. Suddenly, another beautiful figure appeared and landed beside Qin Feiyang. Fire Lotus? Qin Feiyang was slightly taken aback. He turned to look at Fire Lotus and asked, "Why did you come to the Western region so quickly?" "You probably don't know yet, but Little Brat has already given me the authority." Fire Lotus smiled slightly. "What authority?" Qin Feiyang was curious. "The authority to freely enter and exit the Black Tortoise Realm. And after obtaining this authority, I am the same as you. With just a thought, I can reach any place in the Black Tortoise Realm." Fire Lotus smiled. "You can do that?" Qin Feiyang was surprised. That's right. At first, I also thought it was quite magical. But after thinking about it carefully, if the ice dragon and small beast can freely enter and exit the various continents, then the Black Tortoise realm can naturally do the same. Fire Lotus said. That's true. Qin Feiyang nodded and asked, then you can also control the Black Tortoise realm's rule force now. Fire Lotus nodded. Qin Feiyang said in astonishment, then what's the difference between you and me? There seems to be no difference. Fire Lotus muttered. After thinking for a while, she shook her head and said, there is still a difference. What's the difference? Qin Feiyang was puzzled. I can't control the Black Tortoise realm. For example, if you are in seclusion and I leave the Black Tortoise realm alone, the Black Tortoise realm won't follow me. You are different. As long as you leave the Black Tortoise realm, the Black Tortoise realm will fuse into your body. At that time, no matter where you go, the Black Tortoise realm will follow you. In other words, the Black Tortoise realm will always be tied to you, and I only have a little more authority. In my current situation, I am actually the same as the fire python Yuan Bo and by long the protector of the Black Tortoise realm. Fire Lotus smiled. Protector! Qin Feiyang muttered and smiled. With you protecting the Black Tortoise realm, I am very relieved. Fire Lotus was stunned and shook her head. Aren't you afraid that I will become arrogant? You have the right to be arrogant. Qin Feiyang smiled and then glanced at the blood sea below. Fire Lotus glanced at the blood sea, then looked at Qin Feiyang and asked, are you planning to activate the slaughter domain? Since the battle has already begun, let's end it completely. Qin Feiyang said. But Fire Lotus frowned. I know your concerns. The slaughter domain can only be activated once a day, and it can only be maintained for an hour each time. And we don't know if the power of the slaughter domain can be stacked to the level of a sovereign divine weapon. But being timid is not my style. Since we have decided, we must go all out. Qin Feiyang said. All right. Fire Lotus nodded. You also inform everyone to gather at the Devil's Land, especially the people of the Dragon Slayer Palace. Let them be ready for battle at all times. Qin Feiyang's eyes flashed with a sharp light. What about the Mermaid Princess? Qin Rushuang, Yi Shui, and the others? Fire Lotus asked. Qin Feiyang pondered for a while and smiled. They will stay in the Black Tortoise realm. Understood. Fire Lotus nodded. Then go. Qin Feiyang waved his hand. Fire Lotus nodded and turned to leave. Wait. Qin Feiyang suddenly spoke again. What's wrong? Fire Lotus turned to look at him suspiciously. Dan Wangkai refined a lot of elixirs and put them in my cultivation room to distribute to everyone. Qin Feiyang said. Okay. Fire Lotus nodded and took a step forward, disappearing without a trace. Life and death. Misfortune and fortune. Victory and defeat. Qin Feiyang looked up at the sky and muttered to himself. His gaze was incomparably deep. Suddenly, a monstrous, murderous aura broke out of his body. The fate of the ancient world depends on today. As his voice fell, the slaughter domain suddenly appeared. A blood-colored storm immediately set off. Clang! When the blood-colored sword appeared, the blood of the blood sea below surged toward the slaughter domain like a tide. Clang! The blood-colored sword constantly trembled as if it was very excited. A world-destroying sharpness spread out in all directions. In just a few breaths, the entire Black Tortoise world felt Qin Feiyang's murderous aura and the sharpness of the blood-colored sword. This murderous aura, this sharpness, only the slaughter domain. Two figures stood side by side on top of a mountain peak, looking at the western domain. It was Pai Lupi and Theta Wang. The appearance of the slaughter domain means that the Lord God is ready to fight against the dragons. Theta Wang said in a deep voice, Lupi nodded and then sighed. But we can't interfere in the battle against the dragons. That's right. The dragons are too strong. We don't even have the qualifications to be cannon fodder. Theta Wong sighed. Lupi clenched his fists and said, although we can't interfere, we can become the backing of the Lord God. Backing? Theta Wong was taken aback. That's right. What does the Lord God need to open the slaughter domain? It's blood. He's fighting outside, and we'll collect blood for him in the Black Tortoise world. Immediately pass down the order. Whether it's humans or beasts, they must give me half of their blood. Those who don't obey kill. After all, this battle is not only about the fate of the ancient domain, but also the fate of our Black Tortoise world. Because if the Lord God dies in battle, the Black Tortoise world will fall into the hands of the dragons. At that time, none of the living beings here will be able to escape. Lupi said in a deep voice, his entire body filled with a shocking, murderous aura. Theta Wong said, then let's split up. Let's go. As his voice fell, the two turned into a stream of light and disappeared. Zhongzhou. Everyone above the 9 heavens realm, gather here, quickly. Qin Batian and Lu Zhengyang stood high in the sky. As Qin Batian's voice fell, one figure after another rushed out from the ground below. Finally, there were 5 to 6 million people gathered here. The lowest cultivation was at the half-step 9 heavens realm. Boom! More than 100 terrifying auras appeared. The Rain Emperor, the Ice Emperor, and the 108 generals landed behind Qin Batian and Lu Zhengyang one after another. The Rain Emperor and the Ice Emperor's cultivation had already reached the great success Undead Realm. The moment you've been waiting for has finally arrived. However, it's hard to say whether you'll live or die in this battle. I want to ask you, are you prepared? Qin Batian glanced at the millions of people and said in a deep voice, what joy is there in life? What pain is there in death? We're prepared to die in battle. Everyone shouted in unison. Their loud and clear voices resounded in the sky above Zhongzhou for a long time, and even spread to the Devil's Land. The Devil's Land! Fire Lotus looked at Zhongzhou, then looked at Hui, the 5-clawed golden dragon, the blood Qilin, Zhao Tailai, and the others standing in the void in front of her, and asked, are you prepared? What haven't we seen before? Mere dragons. What's there to be afraid of? Zhao Tailai laughed heartily. Tang Hai's eyes under the mask also had a trace of a smile. Thinking back to the battle between Great Qin and the demon ancestor, it was almost impossible to win, but in the end, everyone worked together and fought a bloody battle and finally won. This time was no exception. You're tuning in to the Thunder Spear YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.